Minute taker, please call the roll.
Alderman Lazara.
Here.
Alderman Jacob.
Here.
Alderman Winger.
Here.
Alderman Catalano.
Here.
Alderman Sizmarsky.
Here.
Alderman Roy Wesley. Alderman Woods.
Here.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting November 14, 2013.
So move.
Any questions? Alderman Jacob?
I have a question on, there's a motion there. Pull it up here, I'm sorry. It's the motion for the letter to approve the termination of the letter of credit with the 2-year maintenance bond. And I thought it was pending also with the city attorney, city manager, and city engineer approval.
Mr. Bond?
That is true, and that happened at the council level, so it probably wouldn't be reflected. I don't know if that was the motion coming out of committee, but at the council level, that was definitely the motion, and that's the method in which we're proceeding.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Report and recommendation, recapture agreement, request to amend city code. John, Jennifer, which one? Jeff? Who has the honors?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'll turn the floor over to Ms. Hennigan in a minute. Staff has been requested several times over the last few months to relook into recapture agreements, how the city puts them together, what agreements might still be out there, and what we should possibly do to revise our current policies and procedures. So with that in mind, let Ms. Hennigan explain her memo and give you a little more information.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. As you all know, the city currently has 3 active recapture agreements. These were approved from 1985 to 2008 was the most recent. And over time, many of these resulted recapture payments that are a significant financial burden for property owners, and they can impede development and property improvement in those areas. Since 2010, the zoning ordinance automatically entitles developers to a recapture agreement with a guaranteed 6% interest amount. Although this is capped at 33%, the amount can still be a significant deterrent to the improvement of properties. Staff is recommending that rather than guaranteeing developers these agreements with set interest rates, that we remove that section from the zoning ordinance. State statute already allows municipalities to consider recapture agreements, so there's no need for it to be in our code. By doing this, the City Council would be given the discretion to look at agreements on a case-by-case basis, since what's appropriate for, say, one property owner extending a water main to hook up his property may not be appropriate for someone doing, say, 100-unit developments. The circumstances may be different, and the City Council may not even want to enter into recapture agreements in certain circumstances. But this would really free up the council to look at these things rather than trying this one-size-fits-all approach that we currently have that has resulted in some pretty high interest payments. That's not the intent of recapture agreements, really. It's just to do something that's fair for the developer, fair for the city, and for the surrounding property owners. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Mr. Bond?
Yeah, I was also asked to look into it, just to give you, and I think Jennifer's memo does an excellent job of summarizing it. Essentially what happens is a developer is going to develop a parcel of property or several parcels. They're going to install streets, roads, traffic signals, water mains, sewers, and the purpose of the recapture philosophically is to allow the developer, because if he was installing it solely for his property, oftentimes he's not going to need the street may not have to go all the way down to the end, it may just need to go to his property. Same thing with the water, sewer, and so forth. So there's some benefit to these other properties, and the statute allows, the Illinois Municipal Code allows for the recoupment of those initial out-of-pocket expenses by the developer, and it's allowed to be recouped from those properties that are benefited from that. So you've got an option, either the city says, we're going to take care of all public improvements that are there, regardless of whether it's for a developer or not, and obviously that's a very costly alternative and not one I would certainly recommend, and your city budget wouldn't withstand. If that were the case, you'd have every developer in town or in the three-state region coming in and saying, well, if you're going to foot the front-end cost of my development, I'm offloading some of my risk and my cost to the unit of government, why not? I'm in. So it's typically done where it's the cost of the developer to be able to do these, because the developer cannot develop their property or the parcels that they own and are seeking to develop and possibly sell off without these public improvements. They're not going to get permits, they're not going to get occupancy of those properties until that's done. What's happened in over the history, and you've only got 3 in town, and that's really not a significant number, but if you look at the analysis that Jennifer did, you know, there's a question as to whether or not they are recouping the cost of those improvements, and you're paying with the interest. The thought was you're going to pay, you know, in present-day dollars when the property's actually developed, you're going to pay for the improvements that the developer undertook the financial responsibility sometime earlier. Well, because of the interest rates and, you know, at 8, 9, and 10%, you know, it does become, depending on how far out it goes, it starts to be a significant cost. So the developer's not only recouping the cost of developing the property, they're also, you know, getting the benefit, the investment benefit, if you will, of that enhanced or increased value based upon the interest charges. Some municipalities will fix, as is discussed here, will fix an interest rate that they're willing to allow the developer in the future to recoup their cost in present-day value dollars. Other municipalities say, no, we're going to allow you to recoup your costs. Your costs are fixed. Here's what it costs to put in the streets, the water mains, the sanitary sewers, and we're going to allow you to recoup that cost proportionately from each of the affected or benefited properties, is what the statute says, without any upcharge, without any interest. So, but that's a policy decision that you as the council needs to make and give direction to staff. Is it, are you willing to continue the status quo, which is to allow these, now you're setting it at 6%, or do you want to deal with it as staff recommends on a case-by-case basis and say, wait a minute, if there's a cost that's going to be out there that's unique or different that may benefit these property owners, then maybe you want to give special consideration to that. But the standard is it has to benefit these other properties, otherwise it's simply repaying the developer for some otherwise development costs. The danger you have, and something you need to look at and think about, is the more you put in the recapture agreement, and the statute does have limitations as to what you can put in there, and we've got some things in a redevelopment or a recapture agreement or two that seeks to recoup significant development costs over and above what's specifically statutorily mandated. The problem with that is what you find is those benefited, and that's the term used in the statute again, is the benefited properties, depending on what those costs are that are being offloaded to the benefited properties, pretty soon, if you've got $17,000, $18,000 per property or more, $37,000 per property, if I'm going to, a developer coming around, or I'm a property owner, I want to buy that and develop it, and I start out in $17,000, $20,000, $30,000 in the hole, just to get me to zero, I've already got a $30,000 investment in that property, and then I've got my development costs to build the house and to get all the permitting and so forth. So now what you've done, and that's why you have to be careful with what you're going to do from a policy standpoint, is you want to be able to encourage developers to come in knowing that they're going to be able to recoup some of their costs. What you don't want to do is offload it on the future so that the other property that should be the benefited property ends up never developing because you've made it so cost prohibitive for somebody to develop that property. So it's a balancing act. You want to encourage people to come in and develop in the city, but you don't want to discourage, once their development's done, you don't want to discourage the development of the rest of that area, or because of the fact that it's just too costly. So really, there's two things that I think the staff is looking for direction from the council, and that is, one, are you interested in considering interest as part and parcel of the recapture agreement? If so, is it going to be a standard 6% as provided for in the UDO, or do you want to handle it on a case-by-case basis with perhaps a cap, saying we don't want to go above 6%, or we don't want to go above some percentage. So that's the first determination. The second thing that you should discuss is, what do you want to have in the recapture agreement? We've got recapture agreements where there, real estate taxes for the properties that were acquired are included. There's things in there that include the cost of demolition. Well, the cost of demolition, if I'm buying a bunch of houses in a part of town that the houses need to be demolished, well, that shouldn't be a cost necessarily offloaded to a future, home builder. But if the city's engineer and the developer's engineer say, we have to do retention, the retention has to go at this location, and you have to demolish the house there, well, that makes sense. That would be an unusual development cost that wouldn't have been factored in. So you may want to give some consideration for that demolition, but as a demolition as a whole, you shouldn't. So I think what you really want to do is come to a determination as to what the public improvements that you are going to allow in a recapture agreement. That gives staff some direction, gives the city engineer, and gives us as the attorneys the parameters of what's going to be your threshold of tolerance and acceptable terms that we can include in our discussions with the developers. And it's something, if you find that it's, they think it's overly restrictive, we may have to rethink that down the road. If all of a sudden we see that developers are saying, we're going to Itasca or Addison or wherever else, because we can get a sweeter deal. You don't want to lose out on opportunities, but by the same token, you also don't want to thwart that development for those future benefited properties. So those are really the two considerations. Three considerations, I guess. Are you going to provide for interest? If so, is it on a case-by-case basis? Is there a set interest rate, or is it a cap? And then the third thing is, what do you want to include, or what types of things are you willing to include in the recapture agreement?
Pat, before you end, just one quick question. Do we have to, I'd like it to be no interest in there, wipe that out from the city code, but are you saying that we should have an option in there that they have it? Or we'll just let them address it via state statute, making an offer?
Well, my suggestion or recommendation would be, if it's the desire and the majority of the council say no interest, keep it at no interest. And if some developer comes and says, listen, I've got a unique situation, this property would not develop but for, me incurring these, what are called in the business, extraordinary development costs. And that is, if you had some property that had bad soil and the developer was looking at that, that would be an extraordinary cost that you could say, okay, bring that on a case-by-case basis to the council and let them see if they're willing to alter their position of no interest based on this unique situation. And it's called the delta between what it would cost if that property didn't have extraordinary development costs and that property with the extraordinary development costs. And that may be, that area there, you may want to consider, yes, for that particular improvement, we're willing to provide some interest for that, because that property would not develop but for that extraordinary situation or circumstance. So, you could, as a policy, say, we're of the opinion that there should be no interest accruing on these, or no guaranteed 6% or anything else on these recapture agreements. But if a developer thinks that they have a compelling case, let them bring that to the council and let us take a look at that on a case-by-case basis and make a determination. Because every developer, you've been in the business, every developer thinks that there's costs that are extraordinary. And, oftentimes they're not. They're higher costs maybe, but that doesn't make them an extraordinary. That's by classification, not by dollar amount.
Jennifer?
I'd just like to ask Mr. Bond to clarify something. So we can alter the code to get rid of the current recapture arrangements as they're written, but then the council can separately have a policy that, on these things, interest amounts, what would be included, and that sort of thing. That wouldn't be in the code necessarily, because then if a developer wanted to change it, they wouldn't need to apply for a variation. They could just address it at the council level, correct?
Correct. And so that, again, you do it on a case-by-case basis, and that would be a policy determination by the council.
Thank you.
Mr. Lazar?
Thank you. I think I would like the case-by-case. So I'd like to make that motion on the staff's recommendation on a case-by-case.
Second.
Alderman Winger?
I'm not clear on the motion. Is the motioner requesting that we remove the 6% in the requirement to do a recapture? Because right now, I believe that the 2010 ordinance states that a recapture will be done. So are you motioning to remove that mandate?
I am.
Thank you.
Alderman Jacob.
Before we even discuss going further, could I get some kind of synopsis on the three that we have currently from John or Jennifer?
As far as a synopsis, what do you mean? We didn't really analyze each recapture agreement that we have, how many properties might still be holding to that recapture agreement. We were looking more at the bigger picture. Do we want to continue as we have in the past with our recapture agreements, or do we want to revise our policy and procedures moving forward? But if you have a specific question on one, I can certainly try and answer it for you.
Alderman Jacob.
Well, I guess from what I understand, I mean, several of these are problem cases, and I guess I kind of want to know, how did we get there? Is there any resolution to taking care of these? So I've heard something about doing an SSA to help get rid of these three. Is that possible? Again, I just would kind of want to know a little bit more about the three that are out there.
I would probably want to defer any answer to the city attorney on that. Again, yeah, I'll let him answer that question.
I think the discussion on the SSA was not with respect to any of the properties encumbered by the three thing we talked about in Timber Court and a couple other areas. You do have a difficulty because the three that are on the books were negotiated and entered into, executed between the city and the developer, and so you understand the process. The city acts kind of as a collection arm for the property developer. And the city is, because the city is the ones that are on notice as to when building permits are being pulled and so forth, and that's the triggering event. So it would be difficult to try, and I know with one of the three here, we've had extensive discussions, and the city has looked at different ways to assist in the recovery or recapture, recouping some of those fees. And for one of the property owners who expended a significant amount of money to develop the property, and the collection on those others, just under the terms of that recapture agreement, simply aren't the conditions haven't been met and satisfied because of the way that the other properties have developed. So. And the council over the years has looked at, mandating, tying into water and so forth if there's sewer. And we've had a lot of different discussions which would have altered what the developer would be able to recover, and that has not received the council support. So the current council is, I want to say stuck with, but you're sort of stuck with the terms and conditions of the three recapture agreements we have. Certainly going forward, that's what staff's looking for, is going forward, we can do better than what we've got, but it's going to be difficult for the city situated now to really do much with the three recaptures that are on the books.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
But on one of these recapture agreements, I believe there's one or two houses that's not connected, and I believe we've been out there several times, and he was illegally hooked up to our lines, and I thought there was agreement on some of this capture agreement that they must tie in within so many years. So I don't know how we dropped that ball, if I ain't mistaken. The follow-up, there's 4 recapture agreements. You forgot the one on Farina Court, that's a recapture agreement.
Mr. Murmas.
Because a guy across, Mayor, we went to his house, remember Farina Court, they had,
That one's done, I believe.
oh, that one's done? Okay, all
That's why it's not on the list.
right, so.
Mr. Murmas.
Yeah, just in the memos you received in your agenda packets, the 3 outstanding agreements were put in there as a reference point. I mean, we can talk all night about the current agreements. I'd rather not do that. The agenda item is moving forward. So if we've got questions on the outstanding agreements, we'd probably be better served talking, offline or a separate meeting or whatever, but not tonight. Tonight, the issue at hand is moving forward with the agreements.
White, thank you, Philip.
Alderman Wesley.
I thought when we discussed about the recapture agreements down the line, that we were going to discuss both situation here. I believe that was the motion on the floor at that time, that we look at these and try to solve these and also discuss that. I believe that was the decision that we were going to do, but now we aren't.
Mr. Murmas.
I mean, I defer to the attorney, but I would assume he's going to say we're not going to talk contractual legalities of each individual contract at a committee meeting.
Mr. Bond.
I would concur. And again, if we, there's some, and we've had significant discussion on one in particular, and we've got a meeting scheduled next week with one of the other developers and the terms and condition of that recapture, because as I indicated, a lot of times what happens is the recapture is so rich that, and I know I've had discussions with Alderman Woods and others about that, but is so rich that it really thwarts the incentive for the other properties to develop, and there's someone who's interested in buying one or more of those properties, and they're looking at what they need to pay to even get in the ballgame, and it's become so burdensome that it's unlikely it will develop. So we're going to meet with the developer and say, there may need to be some accommodations, and see if we can't have that discussion. So that's going to happen next week. And but if there's some specific questions, I certainly make myself available. I know staff would, to address the specifics, because we've got a lot of facts that have occurred and circumstances that have occurred on one of the other ones that we could sit down and bring the files fairly significant. And we can have a specific. I don't think that's a committee discussion, but certainly any alderman wants to know what's happened in the discussions that have occurred and what the city has done or attempted to do over the years. I could certainly provide them with that historical perspective, or get a memo to the council to everybody be brought up to speed might be more appropriate.
Alderman Jacob.
Well, in comment, I think maybe there was a misunderstanding, because that's what I asked to talk about, the recapture agreements. That was my whole thing, was to talk about the current ones and if there's any possibility of doing something with them. So when would be a good time to talk? Is that something we would do with the homeowners, Pat, or how would we do that?
Mr. Bond.
Yeah, I mean, I think those would be a discussion, like what I could do is, if anybody's got a specific comment on one or more of those, I can give a memo with staff's input. We can give you, kind of bring you up to date, so everybody knows where those stand, and then we can, meet with the individual developer on those and have some discussions, going forward on that would be probably the appropriate way of doing it.
Okay, well, that's what I would like to do at some point. Thank you.
Alderman Winger.
Before our attorney spends time and drafts and does memos and talking with people, that I believe if there is an issue with one of these three, that the citizen or the interested party should bring that request forward in a letter to the mayor or to the city, and then we can start that work.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
It's already been brought to the city in that, and the point is, we need to solve it, regardless, okay?
I'd like to see the request.
Okay, let me, before, we have a motion and a second, correct?
Yeah, I think maybe we should clarify the motion, because the staff recommendation was that currently there's a guarantee to the developer, 6% interest to the developer, and that's going to be modified to 0% interest, and the staff will deal with it in the council on a case-by-case basis. Is that what your intent was?
Okay, do we have a second on that? Mike Sismarski, second. Okay. Just to comment on it, I mean, I would go along with that. As somebody in the building business, I mean, these, with the interest rate, recapture agreements are meant, just as they imply, recapture your cost, not turn it into an annuity, a trust fund, a college fund, a 401k, retirement plan. It doesn't take too much time before, given 10% interest rates, that quickly, rule of 72s in 7.2 years, you're going to double whatever that cost is, and your property's appreciating it like 2%. So somewhere those lines are going to cross where that property is useless to anybody other than the person that's holding that recapture agreement. So I would be in favor of moving with 0. That being said, Alderman Winger.
I believe it's dangerous to remove what we've done in 2010. If we look at historically, our historic negotiated rates of 9 and 10%, we can only improve on that, and 6% is an improvement. So 6% provides structure in the future. So either we leave it as is and change the 6 to a 0, or we just keep it as is. But to remove the whole requirement of a recapture and take out the percentage, it is dangerous. It just opens us up to 9 and 10% again, and history proves it. Thank you.
Mayor, please.
Real quick on this capped at 33%, one of these is already at 40%, which I mentioned to the attorney, and he started to give me some legal jargon, I'll call it. You want to explain that one to us, Pat? real
Yeah,
quick?
I'd have to look at the specific agreements for that, but there's, obviously there's a limit on the ability to recapture and what statutorily is recapturable. So that's and I'll look at that specific one and give you a analysis of that.
Mayor, please.
And on this case-by-case basis, should we have something in there that says 1% or 2% or 3% versus, because all of a sudden, council's 10 years from now, 15 years from now, I don't know. Oh, yeah, give them 10%. Do we want to stop that kind of stuff? I mean, should it be capped somewhere?
Mr. Forrest.
Well, I think I agree with Alderman Winger. We should keep this in here. As far as the interest rate, I don't think we should set an amount. We could put a phrase in there, something like to be determined, by the city council, or be determined at the time the recapture agreement is being considered, something like that. So that would leave the door open to allowing some sort of an interest rate if that's what the council wants to do at the time.
I'm going to butt in front of you. That's all fine and dandy, but, all those things were kind of quasi in place, and here we sit today with 10% interest, which is completely unacceptable. I mean, it doesn't work at any level. I don't care what the guy's cost, then he doesn't develop the piece of property. I mean, that's just part of the game. I've been involved in 4 recapture agreements. All of them are 0% interest, personally. Mr. Forrest.
Which is the reason we're discussing this tonight. That was then, this is now. Let's move forward with something that's going to be fair and equitable for everybody.
Well, we'll give, Mr. Bond wanted to say something, then we'll go to Mr. Jacob.
Yeah, maybe what you want to do is to remove the 6% and say, but in no event shall any recapture exceed, and put a percentage in there so you don't have that down the road for, future councils. So you've still got the ability to, to allow for recapture of actual costs. If you do want to, based on those extraordinary development costs, you want to include that. But you can also say, yes, but we're putting a ceiling on that. It's not going to exceed this percentage, and maybe 6% is the percentage you want to have in there, since there was some discussion, and as you said, Alderman Winger, just shortly, a little while ago, that was discussed and included in the UDO. Just a thought.
Alderman Jacob.
I just have 2 comments. On the 6%, again, I think Art Wood said it. I mean, the recapture agreements are to recapture your money, not to be an annuity or an income. Nobody here is getting 6% in the bank on their money, so I definitely don't agree with the 6%. And the case-by-case basis, it leaves too much. Again, if I'm not, something today might be good for us, but down the road, it's not fair to other people. 2-3 years down the road for another person. Thank you.
Alderman Lazar.
I'd like to amend my motion on recapturing agreement of 0% interest, not to exceed 0% interest. That Can I do that? Well, no, it was on case by case.
Yes.
Yeah, my understanding was you were going to take out that 6%, and so they would not receive any interest on the recapture unless there was some extraordinary development cost, in which case they'd have to come before the council and plea their case, in which case then you would make a determination as to what percentage you would be willing to give them on that recapture, was my understanding.
That was my
And that was on a
understanding, too.
case-by-case
that we-
basis. So if
That
you
it would
wanted-
stay at zero. To Alderman Winger's point, there has to be some verbiage in there, so the paragraph has to stay, but it's going to be stayed
0%.
at 0%.
Right.
Does everybody agree? Alderman Sismarski.
Yeah, there's a motion on the floor, and I'd like to call the question.
Okay, can we have a roll call vote?
Yeah, I'll fix it. I'll do it.
Alderman Lazara.
Yes.
Alderman Jacob.
No?
Alderman Winger.
Yes.
Alderman Catalano.
Yes.
Alderman Sismarski.
Yes.
Alderman Woods.
Yes,
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
motion carries. Okay, next is report and recommendation, property maintenance code revision. Who's taking this one? John? Jennifer?
A number of times over the past several months, the council has discussed the property maintenance requirements in terms of weed and grass. Currently, it's a violation if these exceed 12 inches in height. Code states that property owners are allowed 7 days to abate the violation, and at the end of that time, the city can issue a citation and have the weeds and grass cut if necessary. At the July 11th PZB committee, it was recommended to shorten the time period for compliance. However, staff's understanding is that state statute may limit that to no more than the 7 days that we currently have. So that's the issue for discussion tonight.
Alderman Jacob?
I'd like to make a motion to change it to 9 inches with the 5 days.
To change the height of the grass cutting to 9 inches.
9 inches.
And the notice to
Notice to 5 days.
5 days. Do we have a second? Let me ask a question, since there's no second. When you're saying that state statute is 5 days acceptable by state statute, do they need 7?
I would defer that
Days,
to
does
the
it-
attorney.
Mr. Bond?
Yeah, I didn't bring that file, but my recollection is it's 7 days. And I know communities do it in shorter time, and they've done it without challenge.
Okay. Well, I'll make a motion to make it 8 inches in 7 days.
I second that.
Questions? Alderman Winger?
I was open to the discussion of 3 to 7 days, and my voting shows that at the last time we discussed this, but then hearing about the state statute, and it's got to be 7, so I do concur that, we keep it in line with the state. Changing from inches, I was never in favor of it. Once we go lower and call it 8 now, I think we're going to create a lot of neighbor disputes, and we're going to get phone calls, and we're going to get in the middle of neighbor disputes. And I believe we're managing now. I'm not aware of any cases that we're not managing to, so I believe we should leave it the way it is. Thank you.
Alderman Jacob?
Well, I've had several complaints this summer, and I've made some phone calls to other communities, and we're the only community within about a 10-mile radius that has a 12-inch, for 12 inches.
Alderman Lazara?
John, do you know how many citations that we gave out for this particular ordinance?
Mr. Forrest?
I would say probably only a handful. Typically, what we'll do is if people don't comply, we have if Public Works is too busy, we'll have a private vendor cut the grass, and then we'll charge it back to the property or lien the property if we need to. There have been citations issued for this, but typically what happens is when the defendant shows up in court, the judge asks him if he's cut his grass, he says yes, and they dismiss the case.
Alderman Lazar.
So we really don't have an epidemic here in the city, do we?
No, and that's also the opinion of our code enforcement officer as well.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think that anybody's saying that there's an epidemic. But again, when you compare us to other towns, and if we're letting it go to theoretically 12 inches, and by the time you write the citation, it's, whatever, 14, 16 inches, the question is, do we want to wait that long? Do we want to be a little more proactive? I don't think that there's 10,000 houses that we're going to cite for cutting their grass. That's really not the issue. It's just to be a little more ahead of the ball and proactive in our community to clean it up. That being said, Alderman Lazar.
8 inches, I might as well send my check in now. I think that's a little low. I mean, maybe I would compromise on that a little bit. I don't know. I would probably have to go somewhere around 10 inches before I think that we should have a citation. Like I said, I know that my grass has been 8 inches.
Mayor, please.
As far as the 8 inches, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't think our inspectors are gonna be getting out there with the ruler at 8 inches. It might be 9 or 10. I think the intent is to try and get this cut before it goes to 14 and 16 inches. I'll be honest with you, some weeks when you skip, I'm sure I'll get the citation as well at 8 inches on some spots in the grass, but, the first thing is, you're just letting the residents know, you're putting them on notice, but you're not actually giving them the citation until 7 days later. Is that correct, John?
Correct. And just to put things in perspective, remember your paper is 8.5 inches tall, so we're talking grass this high would be a violation.
Right, that's pretty tall. And I'll chime in going, there's probably some times when we have a lot of rain that I'm pushing that limit also. So it's not, I don't want to be the grass Gestapo to send, hire 10 guys who are running around writing tickets on, and measuring everybody's grass, on Fridays. But I just want to be more proactive, that we're not waiting, as John showed that piece of paper, and I'll turn it over the other way. We're not even
Right.
considering it until it gets that tall.
Right.
And how do we know how tall that is if the neighbor's grass is already 8 inches too? So 12 doesn't look like 12 anymore. So the reality is the complaints aren't coming in because nobody's going out until the grass is 14 to 16 inches tall. And you got to send out the combine or a swathing machine to cut the grass. So, that being said, Alderman Mike Sismarski.
Just being a homeowner and also having a very busy lifestyle, raising children and just other things, we should not be up here telling people how to maintain their lawn when it is within state statute. I mean, if it rains twice a week, like the mayor once said, I could be out, I'll have to start sending you a check now. And if you live in a condo, that's great. You got somebody cutting your lawn for you. Have them come over and cut mine. So, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that got busy lifestyles that can't keep up with stuff, and eventually they get to it. I mean, you just said yourself, we don't have an outbreak of Everglades growing on around here, so I think we should just drop it and leave it be.
Alderman Jacob.
I just want to make a comment. Again, I'm not saying we're going to be lawn Nazis. Just like Art Wood said, I want to be more proactive. By the time 12 inches, somebody's grass gets to 12 inches. By the time we actually go out and cite them, we're almost at 2 feet. I mean, that's all I'm saying, is be a little more proactive. I'm not asking for our inspectors to be out there measuring grass, just to be a little bit more proactive and go from there.
All right, let's take we have a motion and a second. Let's take
What is the motion?
8 inches in 7 days.
8 inches in 7 days. Let's take a roll call vote.
Alderman Lazara.
No?
Alderman Jacob.
Yes.
Alderman Winger.
No.
Alderman Catalano.
No.
Alderman Sismarski.
No.
Alderman Woods.
Yes,
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
Abstain.
motion fails. Next, report and recommendation, 200 Forest View demolition contract. Mr. Forrest or Ms. Hennigan? Mr. Forrest,
I'll do this one.
it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the time is finally here. We've got the hazard mitigation grant funding. It's been approved. The city has moved forward with the purchase of the first house to be demolished. It's 200 Forest View. That has been an eyesore and a property maintenance issue for about 5 years. We are scheduled to move forward with the purchase of the second home later this month. And so staff is, we solicited requests from 4 different demolition contractors, but because of the fact that these demolitions are going to be staggered, we didn't have them just lump them together in one price. We had them bid individually on the different projects. Of the 4 contractors that were contacted, 2 of them did not care to respond, and we did get bids back from 2 different contractors. DMD Demolition of Franklin Park was one of the contractors that Bensonville used very extensively when they were demolishing houses during their Elgin O'Hare expansion. Their price was considerably less than the second company that put in a bid, and I presented the contract to the city manager, and now we're bringing it forward for approval, for your consideration and approval. I also received a bid, it's not on the agenda, but I also did receive a bid from them this afternoon for 277 Edgebrook, which is another property the city owns that needs to be demolished. The asbestos testing was done today, and I expect to get those results back in about 2 weeks. Once we get the results from that, the houses should be ready to be taken down.
Alderman Eugene Wesley?
I have one question on this. The demolition, do we know if there's any asbestos in this house, or are they going demolition, or?
Mr. Forrest?
That's any of the standard contracts, and also the EPA require that there be testing for asbestos, so we did hire the firm that we had used a few years ago when we demoed the properties on Commercial. They gave us a very good price to do the testing, and as I just mentioned, I met their staff this morning at 200 Forest View and at 277 Edgebrook. They took all their samples. They expect to have results back to us in about 2 weeks.
Can I do a follow-up?
Alderman Wesley?
So you got a contract here now with a demolition guy, the demolition, the 200 Forest View property. How am I know that this is gonna be the price if they find out that they have to do something different, that the house has asbestos? You're gonna guarantee me my price ain't gonna, you ain't gonna come back here and my price now went up additional $3,000 because they have to do something special because it's got asbestos in it? Because I know asbestos, you have to wear the suits and remove the asbestos before you demolish the area or whatever. So my question is, I didn't see that in this contract.
Mr. Forrest?
Typically, a demolition company like this does not do the asbestos removal. If you've got asbestos removal required, which is something one of the buildings on Commercial Street did have, you hire a special company that's all they do is remove hazardous and toxic materials. We found a little bit on one of the Commercial Street buildings, and, I have that company's information handy should these tests come back showing asbestos. But typically, any demolition contract is not going to include asbestos removal, and they are going to require a sign-off that there is no asbestos on the site, because the trucks will get turned back at the dump if they find that.
So our price is this demolition of the property right now, and so they won't move forward until we get the test results back, because I don't want that stuff.
Correct.
Okay. I'll make a motion to award the contract to DMD Demolition in a not-to-exceed amount of, is it 16,000 even? That is my motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Items to be considered at future meetings, CMAP housing update in January. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add?
If we're going to, are we going to do the one-on-one with staff about those recapture agreements?
I think that would be a closed one-on-one thing. Okay. That being said, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I'd like to call the Public Works to order. Minute taker, make a note that all the same people are here. I'd like to have a approval of the minutes of meeting from November 14, 2013. Do I have a motion?
I make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes. All opposed? Sorry. Report and recommendation for 2014 Gypsy Moth Spray contract with Clark Environment, mosquito management, and a not-to-exceed amount of $20,824. That is my motion. Do I-
Second.
Second.
Any questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Okay, number 5, report and recommendation on purchase of furnishing for the administration building at the wastewater treatment plant. Actually, before I call for motion, can you give me a figure on what that is?
What, the figure?
Yeah, what that cost is to
The,
furnish the water
the
treatment?
the furnishings itself is $10,524. That's to do the tables, chairs, desks, whiteboards, file cabinets, as such. There's additional cost of just over $1,000, $1,050 for drapes, and then additional $800 for television.
Okay, so we can say
So the total-
not to, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the total cost not to exceed is $12,374.
12,374. So not to exceed $12,374.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that is my motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Question.
Alderman Wesley.
First of all, I want to thank Matt for going out and getting these quotes, because at first the quote came back in here, ballpark figure was about 28 to 30,000.
That's for?
Or for, you know, I appreciate Matt taking the time, laying it out. If you look in their packet, he laid that building perfect with all the furniture in our packet. So I commend you for doing the hard work to get all these prices. So I'm in favor of it 100%.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Just the one other thing too, we did utilize what we could from the old building. For instance, there was file cabinets in there. File cabinets could be expensive. The file cabinets were almost in perfect condition. So we didn't just order all new because we're moving into a new building. We kept what we could. The file cabinets were like new. There were some other things we kept too, so.
Very good. Alderman Jacobs.
I'm in favor. Just had one question. This television for the conference room, I mean, and for $800, who's this TV for exactly?
Basically, it's going to be a 60-inch television, between a 50 and 60-inch television. I didn't know exactly what price I could get, where I can get it at any given time. I did some searching on the internet, found regular pricing to be right around $800. Obviously, we will do our due diligence to get the best possible pricing. What we would use it for is for trainings. We could put weather reports up, but mainly it's going to be for training, for small trainings for people. We can get 6 people around the table. The room itself, we could probably put 12 to 13 people in there for small trainings, and especially with the whole project going on still, to be able to bring people together and put things up on the screen and show them the project, it would be great to help.
Thank you.
Did I have a second on that motion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? That passes. Next, we have a report and recommendation in the pre-treatment program engineering services. Yearly contract with Robinson Engineering for 2014 in the not-to-exceed amount of $95,100. That is my motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions? You going to have a roll call on this?
Alderman Lazara.
Yes?
Alderman Jacob.
Yes.
Alderman Winger.
Yes.
Alderman Catalano.
Yes.
Alderman Sismarski.
Yes.
Alderman Woods.
Yes.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
Yes.
That passes. Report and recommendation, purchase of case loader backhoe from McCain Industries in the not-to-exceed amount of $97,550. Do I have a motion?
Did you make the motion approved?
No. I asked.
I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of the
I'm
back,
not for it. What? Go ahead. Second?
I'll make the motion approved to buy a backhoe for $97,550. That is my motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Questions? Peter, Jacobs?
I have a couple questions here. Didn't we purchase a backhoe about 2-3 years ago?
Yes, sir. That was purchased for the Utilities Division. This would be purchased for the Streets Division.
Go ahead, Pete.
I guess my other thing is I'm having a difficult time with this because the industry I work in, we evaluate equipment for cities and schools, and this tractor, or this, is only 11 years old. I mean, it's not even, its useful life is 15 years. I see schools and municipalities using these things for 20, 30 years, and also the other thing is, it seems like for $2,500, for roughly about, under $4,000, this thing could be fixed and some modifications made, and it will be, I'm assuming it's going to be good for several more years.
Go ahead, Matt.
This piece of equipment was scheduled for replacement within the replacement program. Whereas the hours are low in it, the amounts that I put in here, these are things that need to be replaced before we can do hardly any more work with it. Just these replacements and purchases will not extend this vehicle in too much longer through its useful life. We looked into it, it should be between about $15,000 to $20,000 is what we need to put into it. And putting $15,000 to $20,000 into a vehicle that's 11 years old, when we think we can get 15 years out of it, I don't believe is a good way to spend our money. In the future, beginning this year, I'm going to relook at every single vehicle, replace it in the replacement program where I believe it should be. And things like this backhoe, if we're going to put $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 into it, you put it in year 7, 8 in order to get to 15, 16, not in year 11 to get to year 15. For the sole purpose is we're getting $22,000 trade-in value on it. If I put another $20,000 into it, now it's 5 years older. The engine may not make it till 15 years. Transmission may or may not make it till then. And now we've lowered the cost of our trade-in value as well, plus with the money that we just dumped into it. So that's why at this time I believe that this loader backhoe should be purchased.
Matt, the problem that I'm having also, like Alderman Jacob said, the standard industry states that this equipment is good until 5,500 hours before you really even start putting any maintenance, major maintenance to it. They did say tires and, the regular oil changes and that kind of thing. They said the engines are good until about 8,500. We've had this machine for 11 years, and we put in, was that around 2,800 hours? Is that what we're saying?
Almost 3,000 hours,
Almost
2945.
3,000 hours.
Yes, sir.
So that's about what, 8 calls a year is what we're averaging on this backhoe?
Eight repairs a
Right.
year? Yes, sir.
A year.
Yes, sir.
And we initially probably paid around 90,000 for this machine?
I do not have the initial purchase price.
Okay, well, I'm guessing that's probably right. And it's valued at 20,000 right now?
The trade-in value, I believe, is 22,000.
So we've taken a possible hit of around 60,000 for this machine if we sell it. Is that correct?
I get, yes.
Yeah, depreciation.
Depreciation, I'd have to check with our depreciation schedule, but
Okay. Then we were also saying that to get it back to possibly restoration level, around 20,000.
no, that's a rough estimate. What we would have to do is, there's a large amount of rust throughout the whole machine. You have to remember that this piece of equipment is utilized for salt, movement of salt onto trucks, pushing it up into the dome. Having the salt there causes rapid deterioration of the vehicle. Obviously, there's some maintenance, we'll call housekeeping maintenance items that probably should be tightened up a little bit to reduce the amount of salt wear on that vehicle. But right now, that's something that I can't change that now. And as of right now, we would need to have the whole thing sandblasted, repainted. The windows, there's some work that needs to be done to the windows. The hood, obviously, that was in here, it's got a pretty good size defect in it that needs to be replaced. The hydraulic tubes are metal and they're corroding away. So at this time, spending the additional money to put into a vehicle that's 11 years old, I question that as a viable opportunity.
Alderman Wesley?
We sat here when you did the budget, and we did a 5-year projected of equipment replacements. We have done it in the past that there's been a year or two that we came here and we ended up buying 5 pieces of equipment because we didn't have a 5-year plan. It's just like in the fire service, you have a plan, you replace equipment as we go, because one way or another, this council is going to have to come back here and prove 6 vehicles if you put this one off and not move forward with the replacement. We replace squad cars every single year, but there's some squad cars we got rid of that only had 40,000, 60,000 miles on it. Okay, so a detective car. I'm just saying is, if you get off the equipment program, that equipment that we sat here as a council, because someone also brought up the point in this UDO that we passed 4 years ago, or last year, 2010, we passed a budget that way to replacement equipment plan, every 5-year plan. I think we should stick to it. It's the same thing with the road project. We do a 5-year plan or whatever, stick to it. Why are we going to have a debate on a piece of equipment that needs a repair? And now, if he tells me there's a defect on the lights, and the windows now, as far as I'm concerned, that vehicle should never be used at all anymore, because now we're running into a safety issue. If he's telling me there's a defect with those windows right now.
Well, he's just saying that now.
Okay, as far as I'm concerned, as of right now, he should go back and stop using that equipment right now.
Matt, is that true? Is that a safety issue?
The defect is not a safety issue, it's a cosmetic issue.
Okay,
And
well-
also some rusting away. A couple of things. The interchangeability, this new piece of equipment is going to be exactly the same as the piece of equipment that is utilized by the Utilities Division, which gives us flexibility in operators. They don't have to relearn a new piece of equipment. I don't know if people have used a backhoe before, but each of the controls in them are always different. If you jump into this case loader versus a different case loader, the controls are different. By having this one the same as the current Utilities Division one, if there's multiple main breaks, a utilities guy could jump into it without having any training on that particular piece of equipment, because they're exactly the same, which will help us out incredibly in the future.
Alderman Winger?
Matt, I heard you mention that it is the identical or very similar piece of equipment in another division. Is it possible that the two divisions could share that piece of equipment?
I don't believe that at this time it's possible. Not having a extreme knowledge of all the inner workings of the department might be hard for me to make that determination at this time. I do know that the place that I came from, it was very viable to have two different backhoes, so that the water division and the streets division can work independently of each other, and not have a scheduling worry, especially with the separation of location between the two different divisions here. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to make sure that the piece of equipment is available, especially if it's an emergency or something that, hey, we've got 2 hours, let's run out and do this. Oh, it's gone because they're utilizing it for another different kind of main project.
Thank you.
Mayor, please.
Actually, I just heard Matt say that he's going to be evaluating our whole replacement program, and I'm glad to hear that, just because of what came out of, we had a police operations meeting, practice last week, and there was a couple of things that were said in the meeting by one of our workers and one of our employees talking about certain equipment, so naturally I posed some questions to Mr. Wilson. He said that he's already spoken to Matt and they're already looking. There was a couple pieces of equipment that maybe shouldn't have been replaced a few years back, something to that extent, and Matt is going to check this out, and if he's telling us that this is one that we should, then I think we should. But I think they're going to get a handle on some of these other pieces that are in there that are going to be pushed back, from what I'm understanding. Just from and I really didn't go to Matt, honestly, I just talked to Mr. Wilson a little bit, and he said staff is working on it.
Alderman Woods.
Thank you. I spent some time with Matt this afternoon and had a conversation, because I was of the same opinion as you, as we don't need to replace this, but when we kind of covered how the equipment's used, how it's stored, the conditions that it works under, all the other things, it's kind of like some people have cars with low miles on them, but if they're parked outside, those things rust out long before they, fall apart, lose some value. I then, because it's always been a concern of mine of maintaining our fleet and being proactive, ordering the right stuff, buying stuff in quantity, we had a lengthy conversation of which he agreed that he wanted to reassess, and hasn't had the opportunity to review everything already, but, was talking about being more proactive and maybe taking care of that backhoe that we're talking about. It never gets cleaned, or given the conditions it works in, we understand what's happening, and therefore, as part of the maintenance, it probably needs to be hosed down or washed with all the salt conditions once in a while. So I would say, we hired this guy, he looked at it, he kind of gave me some good reasons for it. I don't 100% like it, but I think I'm going to have to give him the go-ahead on and take his opinion, and hope that he puts that program together and does better for us on our fleet, so that we don't have to replace these just because they reached an age. Let's stretch them and be proactive, do that maintenance at the 7th year, as opposed to waiting till it falls apart and go, if we rebuilt the whole thing, we could get 2 more years out of it, because at that point, it ceases to make sense, just because we're reducing the amount of years we get out of it.
Right, well, I think it's a shame that we're buying this because we didn't take care of it.
Frank, on that one, I agree 100%. I'm
Because
not going to say argue, but
5,500 miles.
I've discussed that.
Or hours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm in the construction business, and when I looked at it, ours are in clay and stuff. We don't meet with the salts like they do, and it's not always outside, so there's other things. So when I waited, it kind of made sense. He had a good argument, so that's, if that helps you at all.
Alderman Samansky?
First of all, being in the heavy equipment industry, the amount of hours don't mean anything. It's how hard that machine has worked. I mean, you could have 4,000 hours on it, and that machine could be beat up just as bad as a machine with 20,000 hours on it. It all depends on what they're doing with it. But what I would like to see, Matt, is they do have protective coatings out there that they use on certain machines, like painting companies, they put a protective coating on so they can wash it off easily. Maybe something, because it sits in a salty area, the viable parts of the machine could be coated, extra coated with
Yeah.
with a polyurethane or something, or.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I could look into that, sir. Obviously, with
Does cost
the
more.
cost that I'm asking for right now, it's not going to be included in that, but we could always add that on, or
Well, we
do
got
it,
the same
do it
anyway.
aftermarket.
You know, Matt, I'm kind of getting swayed to say yes on this, but I sure would like to see a better maintaining program, if you want to call that. Because if I'm replacing this because we know every so often we're just going to replace it anyway, well, that's not what I want to hear. You know, I would like to see our equipment, I'd like to see us get our value out of it, our money out of it. Go ahead, Matt.
I agree with everything that everybody has said so far. A backhoe at 11 years, obviously, it took me a little bit of time to agree to it myself and to rationalize it. I think that by being proactive, doing some things that we've talked about here, doing some other things that I've thought about, to make sure that our vehicles, we do get the most life out of them, whether it be rehabbing salt trucks at 7 years to get 15 or, you know, or at 8 years to get 16 years out of them, instead of saying, okay, at 10 years or 12 years, we're just going to replace them. I think we need to be proactive with maintenance, but also very vigilant about how we spend our money. And under my watch and the Public Works Department, that'll be a main key.
Yeah, and I think not just on, you know, Public Works, but like Alderman Wesley said, that, you know, we had squad cars that only had 40,000 miles. So, I mean, are we in a mindset just to replace them just because we want to replace them? Maybe that's something that we all should look at. Alderman Jacobs?
Just a couple comments. I mean, one of the reasons this even, you know, I was even asking questions, according to this, it looked like we only needed to spend $3,700 to fix it. I did some research. I mean, we're getting a heck of a price. I mean, I looked up this exact model. I mean, just for a used 2012, it's more money than this. So the price is good, and everything you're saying, you know, I would definitely go with your recommendation. The only thing I do want to add is, just because our budget says we're going to replace a vehicle in 10 years, I mean, it's still, we need that department head to say, yes, it does need to be replaced. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, the chief of police may say, yeah, we replace it every year, but you know what, this vehicle could be used for another year. So I think the department head really has to look at that, and just because it says 10 years doesn't mean we have to get rid of something in 10 years.
Alderman Catalano?
Do we get a warranty on this new?
We do. I believe it was a 5-year warranty. I would have to go back and talk to Mr. Tover from McCann to make sure. I can find that out and let you know.
That's it, thanks.
Okay.
Last question, and then I'm going to take a call for a vote. Alderman Wesley?
First of all, I didn't mean to go that route that you said we should replace it. The point is, the staff, he was a staff, he brought it to us, he thinks it should be replaced, so we should move forward. The other thing, I need to amend my motion, because we're going to have to put a radio in and a fire extinguisher, snow removal vehicle, triangle, and first aid kit. So I'm going to amend my motion not to exceed.
Don't we have one in the other one already? Can't we just transfer them?
That radio needs to be replaced.
That radio needs.
The radio,
$750.
$750. So the total cost of the whole thing would be $98,421.31. Which,
That will be amending my motion. Keep in mind, under that, the budget for this was supposed to be $11,578.69. So we're still under the budget that we budget for. So I will amend my motion to $98,421.31, not to exceed.
Is that the second?
Does that make you happy?
I'm a sass.
I agree.
I like do a roll.
Alderman Lazara.
Yes.
Alderman Jacob.
Yes.
Alderman Winger.
Yes.
Alderman Catalano.
Yes.
Alderman Sizmarsky.
Yes.
Alderman Woods.
Yes.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
Yes.
That passes. A report and recommendation, Ward Number 2, Capital Improvement Project. I'm going to turn that over to Matt.
Okay. This project is the Ward 2 Capital Improvements Project, which is being designed by Trotter and Associates. Tonight, we're going to have a presentation by Trotter and Associates, Mark Bushnell, and Rob, I forget Rob's last name, sorry, Rob? Rob Lincoln. That's going to give us a brief overview of this project. There are a couple main questions that we need that's the main purpose of this presentation tonight, is not to do the whole entire design of the project, but to design or to answer the questions of the outlets for the storm water management. Should we use the existing storm sewer routes and drainage ditch routes? And also, what about extending the cross-sections of the roadways? So I'm going to turn it over right now to Mr. Bushnell and Mr. Lincoln for their presentation.
Okay.
Alderman Wesley?
Can I just ask one question? Did they get, I know we did the I&I study up there for repair of sewers and all that. Did they get a copy of that?
The videotapes are sitting on my desk right now of the I&I study. Mr. Bushnell is going to receive those within the next couple of days.
So what we're going to do tonight is we can make a decision, do we replace those?
No, we're not. We're talking, the major points that we're talking about tonight are the outfalls into the Salt Creek
Okay.
and the cross-sections of the roadway. So it's not, are we going to replace this pipe or that pipe or this pipe or that pipe? It's just, are we going to reutilize the existing outfalls on however we get to that outfall point, and also the cross-sections of the road.
But it's my follow-up question, so this project designing now, but are they going come back to us then and see what pipes we have to replace and what we may be able to use in there on those pipes, or no?
Yeah, I mean, this is not the total design of the project, this is just one part of it.
Okay.
One part of the design.
Okay. We good? Okay. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name's Mark Bushnell. I'm with Trotter Associates. And as Matt mentioned, we're here to give kind of a status update on the Ward 2 capital improvement projects. I'm the project manager. Rob Linke is the senior project engineer and the drainage guru of the office. The project location, it encompasses Edgebrook, Oakwood, Potter, and Carter. All told, this is about 5,000 linear feet of street, and the project goals are to provide a reliable water service, basically to replace all the water mains within that area, to improve stormwater drainage. Rob will kind of go into what we found so far and what we've seen from the hydraulic models, and also talking to city staff, and then to replace and widen the existing roadway. I'm going to go back one slide. Basically, the water main would be replaced throughout the entirety, basically anywhere there's pavement, and it also includes a crossing underneath Salt Creek to replace an existing water main that crosses through that area. Right now, there's a rural cross-section for a roadway. Basically, that means that there's no curb and gutter. It is a road without an edge, sometimes with the aggregate shoulder, but it relies on swales and culverts for stormwater conveyance. The roadway width is 16 to 19 feet. There are some sections on Carter that are as narrow as 13 feet. Carter is that street on the very, very south end of the project. What we found is that the storm sewer is basically, it's an older storm sewer system, and it's not adequate to carry flows. We have a lot of roadway overtopping. And what we did was we went out there, did investigations, walked the area with the sewer department, public works department, and then developed a hydraulic model and identified that there was basically flooding going over the streets, that water wasn't, in smaller storm events, water was actually overtopping the roadway. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rob. Rob will walk through kind of what we've done to date, what our findings are, how we're going to address some of the issues, and then present basically the two items that we would like to talk about in order to get a consensus to be able to move forward.
Thank you very much, Mark. So what I will do here, we'll start, just talk about the tasks that have been completed to date. Certainly all of the field survey and site investigation has been completed at this point, so we have a full topographic survey of all 5,000 feet of roadways, as well as all of the existing drainage infrastructure, located where all the outfalls are out, the existing outfalls out to Salt Creek. We've looked at the available floodplain mapping information and seen how that impacts the project. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And as Mark alluded, we've completed the existing drainage analysis, as well as done some analysis on proposed conditions of what we think would work. And again, part of the reason why we're here today to talk about some of the decisions that need to be made that will impact that proposed drainage infrastructure. So we really have two different types of flooding problems that occur in this area. The first is the localized drainage problems, and I'm sure the residents here will attest. They've seen numerous instances in which the water primarily drains from the east to the west, so basically from Wooddale Road to the west down towards Salt Creek, and there are numerous locations where Oakwood and Edgebrook are overtopped. So this just shows you a picture of what happened. We were out here in April of 2013, April 17th and 18th, I believe it was. And that was actually pretty enlightening to get a good handle of what's actually happening during an extreme event, and then it helps to kind of corroborate what we're seeing in the drainage analysis, make sure that we're on the right track. There's a second type of drainage problem or concern that we have here within this particular site, and that's the floodplain issues associated with Salt Creek. Of course, when we get a really large storm event, there's several thousand acres. Escapes me the exact number offhand. I know it's over 20,000 acres that drains to this point along Salt Creek. So, of course, Salt Creek being a highly urbanized watershed is very flashy. So we get a 3 or 4 or 5 inch rainfall, the stream comes up, and then basically it floods the overbank areas and extends back across Edgebrook. So this is just an exhibit showing what that floodplain actually looks like. On your left, you're seeing the actual floodplain map. Everybody has these available from FEMA. This tells us what the calculated floodplain elevations are. What becomes of particular interest to us is when we actually take that floodplain elevation data and we apply it to the actual data that we've surveyed out there. And that gives us a really good picture as to where the floodplain really is within the project site. And that's kind of this squiggly line that moves down through here. And that becomes pretty important because, as you can see here, about 90% of Edgebrook is within the floodplain, and certainly there are regulatory restrictions and requirements of what you can and can't do within the floodplain that impact the overall project. So that became an important thing for us to identify. And of course, these floodplain issues largely have been addressed by the city previously. As you can see, the original developments that occurred here along Edgebrook, all of the houses here. And you look currently, and as you guys are more than aware, probably more so than I am, of the buyouts that have occurred there to remove those dwellings from the floodplain. And that's really the only way that you can address that floodplain issue. There isn't really a storm sewer or changes that we can do associated with Edgebrook and roadside swales and storm sewers and that would actually do anything to affect the floodplain. So again, just to reiterate, this project and the drainage improvements that we're looking at really don't address any of the larger floodplain issues there, where the floodplain actually crops up and creeps up across Edgebrook. So we performed the analysis. We looked at the existing conditions first. I'll kind of run through a few slides just to show you what some of those results are, some of the things we found. We'll talk a little bit about the design guidelines that we established or utilized in order to come up with this proposed drainage system. And we'll talk a little bit about the proposed drainage system design, some of the permitting requirements and how that impacts, how that's laid out. And obviously, we were trying to be as cost-effective as we could in terms of not just putting in a lot of sewers if we could avoid it. So this is the area broken up in terms of the actual drainage patterns. You see there's 6 primary drainage areas. They generally flow from Wooddale from the east to the west to Salt Creek. And as Mark said before, it's a rural cross-section, so we have roadside swales, driveway culverts. We have a smattering of storm sewers here and there that carry the drainage, again, from Oakwood down through Edgebrook and then ultimately into Salt Creek in these cases here. We'll go to the next slide. So we have these are the existing outfalls for drainage area 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So some of these are kind of small. This one was actually completely buried. We couldn't even hardly find that one. We had to do a lot of probing out there. Many of these are from when the original development along Edgebrook existed. We had storm sewers in there, and then once those houses were torn down, some of those lines were buried, and certainly they really haven't been maintained, so they're partially collapsed and whatnot. So, but we were able to locate all of those. The interesting thing is this area up here, this northern side of Oakwood, actually drains to the north to a large storm sewer. I believe this is a 42-inch storm sewer along Irving Park. But there's a fiber optic line here, so the only way that the storm sewer here can drain into that is it has to go over the top, right? I think it's over the top of these fiber optic lines. So what is installed there is 2 10-inch pipes. So essentially we got 2 10-inch pipes that have to carry all of the drainage from this area. And so we found some interesting things that occur with that, and that affects some of the proposed improvements or the solutions that we came up with. Now, in the existing case, as we said earlier, the roadways are overtopped in numerous locations. Those are shown here in red based on the modeling we did. We were looking at smaller storm events. We're looking at like 10-year storms, 25-year storm events. So these are generally like 2 inches in an hour, 2.5, 3 inches in 2 hours, that kind of thing. So we're not talking about these big 6 and 7-inch storms, such as we had in April. These are actually smaller, high-intensity duration events. Some of the interesting things that we did find, again, we have with these 2 10-inch pipes that drain here. What we found is that this storm sewer system here surcharges, sends water over here between a couple houses. I think this is 256 Oakwood, I believe. I think I got it later on in the presentation. We also see surcharging that occurs in the inlets here, and the water actually flows overland through this area and then across Edgebrook on its way to Salt Creek.
Excuse me, can you just
Yes.
describe what is, if I may, what is overtopped roadways?
Quite literally, it means that during a storm event, we have water washing over the top of the roadway. So if you're driving down the street, you wouldn't see that section of the road. You would see a small creek going across it. And then when I say surcharge, maybe I should have backed up. When we say surcharging storm sewer, you saw one of the earlier pictures there, we saw water bubbling up out of the ground. Well, we actually have a condition along Oakwood here where some of these storm sewers, the water can't physically get out into the storm sewer in Irving Park Road because see all these numbers here, these are drainage areas. So 17 acres, 35 acres, 8, 8, and 11. All of these drain into a storm sewer that runs along Wooddale, makes a 90-degree turn, and runs down Irving Park. So this sewer is already full by the time this water is trying to drain into it. And because this is much higher in elevation here, this is on a fairly large slope, what happens is there just literally is no capacity. It's like trying to put 5 pounds of stuff into a 2-pound bag. It just doesn't work. So what actually happens, we actually get some reverse flow, and it flows out across here. So those are some of the things that we wanted to try to address with the capital improvements. Just one other interesting point that we found too is at the south end here, and there's actually these areas here would actually extend way out into the wall here as far as this 35 acres. There's a large drainage area that feeds into this storm sewer that runs along Wooddale, and what we found is the sewer can't handle it. There's a saddle here in the roadway, and what happens is water actually will jump over the curb line and flow through the backyards here along Wooddale and then down through and make its way to Oakwood. And that's something that we observed in the field as well. We could see debris lines and things like that, and your public works staff confirmed that as well. And again, just the last point there, all of these storm sewers that we have here along Edgebrook, These are all impacted by the floodplain. There's really not a lot that we can do. We just, when the floodplain comes up, the capacity of the sewer is basically, it's all gravity driven. There's just no capacity because there's no hydraulic head to drain those out. So it basically goes up and down with the level of the creek. The design guidelines that we were tasked to use at this point, we were instructed to use a rural cross-section to maintain that rural cross-section. So again, as Mark said, we were going to use curb and gutter. Said we're using a roadway with a swale on either side, maintaining or reconstructing the driveway culverts. Still using storm sewer where necessary because the drainage basically goes from the west to the east is the major slope. But of course, our roads run north-south, so we have to be able to intercept that water, and of course, things flatten out if you're trying to make a 90-degree turn and get it. So in some areas, we are still using storm sewer. The key design guideline then, besides that roadway cross-section, we want to make sure we eliminated the roadway overtopping. We want to have the roads be passable during a certain level event. The design storm or design level event that we are utilizing is a 25-year design storm. Storm sewers are typically designed for a 10-year storm, which again, if you think about that in real-world numbers, that's like a 2-inch storm in an hour. We're designing for like a 2.5 to a 3-inch storm in 1 hour, 3 inches in 2 hours kind of approaches. And as you're kind of thinking about storms that have happened in the past, those are the kind of level of service that we're looking to achieve. This is an example. This is the city's standard cross-section. So this is what Mark and I were employing in the design of this. Again, it's a 22-foot wide pavement section with a 2-foot gravel shoulder, and then we have a swale with 3-to-1 maximum slopes on the side. So this is what we were trying to actually fit into over the existing roadway, and then we'll talk about what those impacts are, kind of the challenges and pros and cons of utilizing that. Just to show you what that might actually look like, in many cases this is along Oakwood, and so you can see here that in this area we have about an 18 to 19 foot wide roadway going to a 22 foot. It's not a whole lot. It's maybe another 1.5 feet or so on either side. Of course, now in many cases these swales are a lot steeper than a 3-to-1. So instead of for every 1 foot vertical you're going out 3 foot. So it's basically like this. In many cases here we might be 1.5 to 1 or something like that. So there would be some grading that would be required out here. So there are impacts associated with that. In a couple cases, we have a very, very narrow roadway. We weren't even trying, well, we tried to get a 22-foot wide section down there along Carter. It's only 13 to 15 feet wide. So what we were proposing at this point in trying to find a compromise versus the city's standard was a 16-foot, and that would minimize additional encroachment and things onto the north side of Carter. And then along Potter, again, it's only about a 16-foot wide pavement section. So, and again, trying to preserve or minimize the impacts of things like the trees. I think it's a nice shagbark hickory right here, if I recall. So we wanted to go to an 18-foot section in this way. So basically, it's a 22-foot section along Edgebrook and Oakwood, 18-foot on Potter, and a 16-foot on Carter. So this is just to give you the kind of before and after as far as the drainage analysis. This is the same slide you saw before. What we're showing here, and I'll kind of flip back and forth, are the changes here that we're proposing to make. So in the existing case, we have the overtopping that occurs, and we have the drainage outlets. What we're proposing to do is this area here, this basin number 2 that originally drained all the way to the Irving Park storm sewer, and then we were trying to force it all down here, and that just wasn't going to work. There's no way to do any improvements to that storm sewer in Irving Park. So the choices are you can either let it continue to overtop and pond in these areas, or we can actually redirect it. There's an existing sewer here between the houses at this location, and so what we're proposing to do is, while we're building a new storm sewer to the north along Oakwood, we recognize that it's not going to be able to take all of the water, so we're basically putting in a secondary sewer between the houses here, and then this is, I believe, property that's owned by the city, and the idea is to open this up to an open channel, and this will then drain down to the swales along Edgebrook. So that's really the major change from the existing to the proposed. Storm sewer improvements along Potter Street, basically picking up this basin area number 3. Again, it's a rural cross-section, so we got driveway culverts and swales along all of these. But basically, as you can see, we've eliminated the roadway overtopping. So this is where water's going over the road in the existing case. The only place where we have water that will continue to go over the road is down here, or up towards the north end on Edgebrook. We have a little bit of overtopping occurs. And again, we still have water that will surcharge out of this sewer even after we take this drainage area and route it this way. So, we're able to solve most of the problems, but, frankly, there's just some bigger capacity issues there that it doesn't look like we're going to be able to completely address unless we run an additional sewer or something down there. And that didn't really look feasible the way the homes in that were laid out. So we have these storm sewer outlets, and we'll talk about those at the end. What we're proposing to do is we're going to reconstruct this existing open channel. This is a ditch right now in the tree line. We're proposing to build essentially a new swale, maintain the existing tree line. We don't want to touch that at all. There's some potential wetland issues there, but also just, the trees have always been there. There's no real reason to cut them down since the property is all publicly owned immediately adjacent to it. So we're basically constructing a new channel there. These are all new storm sewers constructed essentially in the same alignment as the existing storm sewers. So if you go out there today and look at it, and you go out there in a year or 2 years after this is all built, the only difference you'll see is there'll be a new flared-in section at the end with some riprap right at the edge of the creek. The only other change is up here, we have an existing 12-inch storm sewer that comes out to the edge of the creek. Again, it's partially collapsed. We had a really hard time trying to find it. And this is one that we're proposing to open up and basically have an open channel for about 150 feet or so upstream or to the east of Salt Creek. And again, there's some permitting issues involved there. Basically, the Army Corps is looking for water quality improvements. They want to minimize the impacts of urban stormwater runoff directly into the creek, and so that's one of the things that they asked for as part of their permitting. So with going to this 22-foot cross-section, there are some other impacts that we have with that, and primarily we have a lot of large mature trees that are very close to the edge of pavement. If we use a 22-foot wide cross-section, pavement section through here along Edgebrook and Oakwood, Mark and I have identified approximately 33 mature trees that would be removed in order to fit that cross-section that we saw in one of the earlier sites, to fit that through there. And this would just be an example. This is Oakwood. Carter is right, there's the bend right there past that truck. So this is looking south. So, and really this is just to show, kind of hypothetically, I don't want to go through and show you every single tree that, we have them on a map, but I didn't bring all those today. If you stay with existing pavement widths, and you're basically just removing and replacing as is, and living with the narrower streets, that brings it down to about 15 trees that would have to be removed. One of the other issues associated with going with this wider section, while you get a little bit more room, you have better turning radiuses and for cars to be able to pass in that, but multiplied out over 5,000 feet of total roadway, you have a lot of extra impervious area, a lot of extra pavement out there. That actually comes up to about 18,000 square feet. Now, in order to meet the DuPage County Stormwater Ordinance with that new pavement, we have to offset that. Typically, they will require stormwater detention to be constructed for that. The challenge that we have here is this is in an existing residential neighborhood. We don't really have any open spaces where we could dig a hole for a detention basin, except you might say, well, we got all that area down there along Edgebrook. The problem, though, is we saw on the floodplain maps, that's all floodplain, so we can't put any detention down there. So that's one of the challenges that we have with going to this wider section, is we have to come up with a solution to that. One of the solutions that we have is we said, well, to offset that 18,000 square feet, one alternative would be to construct a section of the roadway using permeable pavers. The way the ordinance is written, if you use a 24-inch stone reservoir underneath, essentially they count that as no new impervious area. So that 18,000 square feet works out to about 800 feet of roadway length, which is approximately from Carter Avenue all the way up to Potter. So it basically would be like Oakwood from Carter to Potter. Again, some of the benefits of providing the permeable pavement, again, there's actually a net reduction in the amount of runoff. Right now, for that same area, ran through some very preliminary calculations. It's about 200,000 gallons of runoff that's generated annually that runs off of that onto the, either into the ditch or across the neighbors' lawns and things like that. That's actually reduced by about 90%, so that's brought down to essentially almost nothing, so that there's really no runoff that occurs along that section if you were to use it. And again, it meets the ordinance requirements as far as detention and those kinds of things. It addresses some of the water quality concerns that the larger community has as far as impacts to Salt Creek with the ongoing TMDL and the watershed planning. And of course, charm and character. I know it's obviously it's a different type of section than the pavement, than asphalt pavement, but certainly something to consider. So as far as the decisions, the information, the input that we're looking for, it really comes down to do we preserve the existing, maintain the existing pavement widths, which are again, 18 to 19 feet along Edgebrook and Oakwood, down to about 13 feet along Carter? Or do we widen those streets out in keeping with the city's standard for a rural cross-section? That's really the first thing that we're looking for input on. The second one is on the stormwater BMPs, and again, it's really kind of a consequence of if we go to a wider section, we have more impervious area. We're going to have to utilize storm sewer outlets. We're going to have outlets into Salt Creek. We have to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers in order to reconstruct those. It's a fairly easy process if you're just removing an existing storm sewer, 12-inch storm sewer, and putting a 12-inch storm sewer back. But what we found in the analysis, of course, is that in order to prevent the roadway overtopping and provide some level of protection, the storm sewers have to be increased in size. So when we go back to the Army Corps and say we need a permit to put in new storm sewer outlets in the same location as the old ones, if they're larger, then they have some additional requirements. And that's where this idea of what we're trying to do is find a compromise and say, well, some of these we're going to replace in kind. Some of the ones that we're going to increase, we're going to pull the storm sewer outlet back from the edge of the creek and put them in through a swale. And again, we have the advantage there in that we don't have residential properties right up against those, so we think that's a viable alternative. I think with that, we'll take any questions or comments.
Actually, Rob, I do have,
Or I will turn it back over to you.
okay,
Sorry.
thank you. I do have some questions and comments, especially in the widening of roads. What I would like to see would be the recommendation from the police and the fire department as far as if we really do need to widen these streets to 22 feet. I think their input would be very important to us. And then also, I would like to see possibly canvassing the residents in that area also, seeing that we are looking at removing 33 mature trees.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, our name is Wooddale.
Sure.
So trees are real important to us. So my recommendation would be to see what the police feel about it, widening the streets, and also what the fire department feels about it, and then also what the residents feel.
Mm-hmm.
Any comments or questions on this, guys? Alderman Wesley?
I have a couple questions. The runoff on that you said would still be on the pavement on Edgebrook, on the road?
Yes.
Refresh my memory, and maybe I'm lost here already. Isn't it the piece of property we just bought across the street from the park?
Correct. It actually comes through, right, the water that's coming through from Oakwood,
Right.
right, actually flows the way we're showing it based on our survey, basically on the north side of that building.
So my question here on that, if there's still water coming on there that's going to be still sitting on that pavement, how is that going to affect our lift station? We bought that piece of property for a reason. During this process now with the engineering that we're going through, is there a way that we could do something with that property for we don't? Because that still does not solve our problem with waste, raw sewage backing up once that area is flooded out in that area. Because once that lift station goes under, we got that raw sewage backing up. And I thought that was a purpose, but according to this, his design now that water is going to be remaining there.
Well, again, remember, we also have to distinguish between the two types of drainage concerns or drainage issues that you're dealing with there. I think that it's going to be very difficult. You're already down in the floodplain there, so that area actually, the backwater, when we have any kind of a flooding situation at all in Salt Creek, it backs up all the way through to that area anyway. So it's really comes down to the roadway. I mean, we can put in additional infrastructure to capture this, to keep it from going over the road. But that would be really kind of a separate endeavor to try to flood-proof the lift station that you have there. I don't know if you guys want to jump in or.
But I think the main concern is when we went to this direction, a lot of complaints in that area is when we flood out that area, these people are getting their raw sewer back up into their residence. By not doing anything with that piece and let the water stay there, it ain't going to solve the problem. So my question to Matt or someone, since we're going to be leveling that house, what if we put, and I'm not an engineer, believe me, or else I wouldn't be sitting here. My question is, since we bought that land, is there a way we could put a detention basin there temporarily until we decide if we're going to build a building there or whatever, and pipe that into the detention basin for we don't have the raw sewer backup after that tank goes underwater?
Yeah,
Matt?
I don't believe so that we can do detention there due to the fact that it's within the floodplain.
Right, that entire area floods, which is why you purchased the property.
Which is why it's in the floodplain. So there's no way for us to do detention at that location. The sewage backup, whereas it is related to the flooding situation, are really two totally separate issues. Because if if the sanitary sewer is pumping correctly at that lift station, and we're not having backups from the surcharging of the water going into the INIs and all that kind of stuff, then that pump station should still continue to operate functionally.
But not if it's underwater. It will not, because we've been there when it's been underwater, and it pumps, you can see the flow coming out of it. So my point is, if we're going to spend this kind of money to do this and we better correct that sewer problem too, because out there, one thing, these people will be in here saying, we got raw sewer, we spent all this money up there, and I'm still getting raw sewer back up in my house.
I mean, we'll consult with some of our other engineers on this, but it's my recollection that it's kind of two separate issues with the expansion and improvement of the lift station. That alone would improve, even if we left that as is. So I think it's two separate issues, but we'll verify that.
Mayor, please.
Yeah, on the lift station, from what I remember, we're gonna have to spend about $400,000 or $500,000 to improve that lift station, and then with the remodel of the treatment plant and everything, I think that's gonna, there was a bottleneck or something right at that spot where it's surcharged back, and supposedly that bottleneck's supposed to be taken care of in this Phase 1B, and should improve the whole area.
Go ahead, Jeff.
The mayor's correct. If you remember in the CIP, we won't even be addressing the lift station until after the treatment plant is completed.
Okay, but that is something that we are going to address in the future
Correct,
then?
yes.
Okay. Alderman Woods?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I'll go to the lift station. That was my remembrance of it between the extensive I&I studies we've been doing to eliminate stormwater from getting into the sanitary sewers. That's going to help the improvement that we looked at, which is roughly a $500,000 project, and again, why we bought that piece of property. That's one isolated project, whether the water, at least my understanding, whether the water's sitting on the road by that lift station or not, doesn't have an immediate effect on that lift station. It's all the water getting in it beforehand. So That being said, I would agree they're isolated from each other, although both of them need some work. I am concerned that we do all this work and we still have the entry of that road. When you said underwater, when you said we could do some things, you know, what does that mean physically, and then what does that mean dollar-wise? Does that add 10% cost, 50%
Well,
cost?
we certainly could put additional drainage infrastructure to carry, what happens is we basically have where the roadway is here, there's, this is just a roadside swale and a series of some small driveway culverts here. Actually, just having purchased the one house, that's news to me as far as the design. So if that can be factored in with either a larger pipe or elimination of that entire driveway with that constriction, that right there may be enough to keep the water from backing up on the north side of that and going over the road. But at a minimum, we could certainly put in a larger culvert there to keep this water coming through on this way, or we can bring it across on the other side. So that would be something that we could look at that's pretty, I mean, you know, we're right now in that phase of the work that's really not a significant change to what we're doing. But again, just to make sure we're clear that a good chunk of this roadway is underwater once we get beyond a 10-year storm event, 25-year storm event. You know, this area is going to have water. It's going to back up from Salt Creek across the open spaces here and up onto Edgebrook, and that's not something that we can address. So we have to be very clear that all of the drainage improvements that we make in this whole area here, if we make those and then the following week, you know, DuPage County gets a 6-inch storm, the road is going to be impassable. I mean, we know that right now, and again, that was kind of the point of that earlier slide to say, look, we just simply cannot address that, because the only way you could do that would be to actually raise the road, and that has a whole another series of, you know, consequences. I'm sure you guys are aware.
Go ahead, Art, you have a follow-up?
Right. Okay, concern, you know, we'd like to try to keep the water off if we could. I know that I can't, you know, we've had this conversation with residents all the time. They live next to the creek. I mean,
Yeah.
they understand it too, but try to minimize it. In your statements, you tell me you designed it for 25-year storm, but then just said 10-year storm, so that makes me nervous that we're going back. Are we designing for 25? And
Well-
in 25-year, let me ask this with it. As far as a 25-year storm, I don't know if you guys know, but over the last 15 years, how many storms or flooding events, road flooding, would that have eliminated? Are we going to eliminate, at a 25-year floodplain, are we eliminating 50 of the instances, 25% of them,
Well,
32?
we should be careful too in making the distinction between when we say what we're designing, the storm that we are designing, or the amount of rainfall we're designing the drainage system to handle without consideration of the floodplain, because again, we can't address the floodplain. So if we have a 2-inch storm in 1 hour, that's essentially, statistically, they would say that's a 10-year storm, okay? But in 1 hour, it's 2 inches of rain. All of the drainage infrastructure here is just impacted by that 2 inches of rain that fell here that's draining through. But when we say like a 10-year flood or a 100-year flood in the context of all of Salt Creek, that's a much larger event. That's like, for example, 4 or 5 inches of rain in a day would be like a 10-year flood. 6 or 8 inches of rain over a day, day and a half would result in a 100-year flood. And that's a much larger condition. Again, that's something that we can't really accommodate for along Edgebrook, along this area that's already in the floodplain, that area that we showed that was already in blue. We really can't account for any of those backwater conditions that would occur. But everything else along here, this would all be, is all designed for a 25-year storm. Again, it's about 2.5 inches in an hour, would all be able to drain off of the pavement from the houses into the roadside swales and through the storm sewers, and it would all be kept off of the roadways along Oakwood, Potter, Carter, this section of Edgebrook. It's just in these areas down here, depending on how much rain we get in the rest of DuPage County and up into Cook County, that's going to drive what happens with Salt Creek, and then it may back up onto Edgebrook anyway.
All right, go ahead, Falter.
Yeah, what I'm trying to understand is, given the improvements that we're going to do, let's throw out the 25 years storms or floods or plains, Wooddale has a, definite history with the creek and water. We know what those numbers are. You guys do certain water models, right, when you do this. So when we do these improvements, giving that data, as a percentage, are we improving our position, 10% of the time of those events?
Well, I can say that
15%?
you are definitely improving it in the areas other than Edgebrook, from here down to past Potter. Because again, that's an area it's all driven by what happens with Salt Creek and how fast it comes up. If you have a very short duration, 1-inch falls in 20 minutes, that's going to drain through the storm sewer and the roadside swales, and the water's not going to wash over the top of the roadway. Whereas it may right now in today's condition, because in today's condition we have areas that are drained by very, very small pipes. Most of the pipes are filled in with sediment and those kinds of things. But again, when we have a larger storm event, kind of like a regional-wide type event that, makes the news on Chicago, that kind of thing, Salt Creek's going to come up, and there's really nothing that we can do along Edgebrook. We can size the sewers to accommodate what happens when we have a local event, something that's a short duration, high intensity, but when we have these large 4, 5, 6-inch storms, across all of DuPage County, there's just really nothing that we can do for this area along Edgebrook.
Right, just one quick comment, and then you can
Go
let
ahead.
the mayor go ahead. Just trying to determine the value. You asked me to make a decision, obviously those roads need to be done there, we need to improve the drainage. I mean, that's not even a question, but the amount of money, and do I do a 18-foot road or a 20-foot road? Do I want a concrete ribbon, a gravel ribbon? How much, those things are all going to hinge or be dependent upon what you're telling me, what that value is that you're giving me. If the value is very limited, then we might as well just go to the most economical approach to putting that road in, because it's really going to wear out. There's not too much we can do. Call it a day type of thing. So, thank you.
Alderman Jacobs.
Couple quick questions. First of all, we do talk about the first responders having a problem. Is there an issue there right now for the first responders?
Well, with a 13-foot roadway, the first responders, probably for squads and stuff, would not be as, but the fire trucks that are the biggest problem, getting down in those roads. If there was an incident down towards the south end of Edgebrook, to get equipment down there, to be able to maneuver it around, to make that turn on Carter, just to get out of there, to get back to the station. That's where some of the first responder issues, squads and stuff. Probably, I mean, just like any other car, but when you get 3 or 4 squads down there, then you got a bottleneck and you can't get anything in and out.
Go ahead.
Second question, one of the options here is to put permeable interlocking concrete pavers. Is that even truly an option? Can we salt that? Can we plow that?
Can you salt it? No. Can you plow it? Yes. Can you use alternative anti-icing devices on it? Yes. You can't salt it because it's got holes in it, and the salt will just bounce off and go into it. I talked to, I've got a colleague that's the city engineer for Warrenville, who did the exact same thing down there. I talked to him at length about this project. They've done a project and similar. I believe the picture that was on the slide was actually the Warrenville Road project. There's some good things about it. There's some bad things about it. There's some maintenance issues that are involved in it. Depending on the speeds of traffic, this is going to be very low travel volume road versus what sounds like their project was. So there's going to be some maintenance involved in it, but plowing's not an issue. Obviously, salt is, but we'll be looking at anti-salt alternatives anyway coming up in the future, and that's one of the things that we'll be able to use it on.
I guess in your opinion, is that a viable option to even put that down there or no?
Yeah, it's not a I mean, it's a new option for me. Obviously, I've never used it before, but it seems like it's a different way of going about things. It's not uncommon, so I would say that we could do it, but Public Works would have to kind of change the way that we do things as well in order for it to work worthwhile.
Go ahead, Pete.
Final question, the big question. Do we have any idea what the difference in cost is between maintaining the 13 to 19 foot versus putting the 22-foot cross sections in?
We haven't run a cost analysis because we haven't finalized the design. Right now, we're in the preliminary stage, and that's kind of why we wanted to get consensus before we go forward with that. Your pavement increase will be roughly 20%.
Mayor, please.
Regarding the 25%, I saw Mr. Bushnell before the meeting, and I had some questions about the 25%, or not 25%, 25-year. And I go, is that better than what we have? I believe your answer was yes. Is that correct?
Yes, right now, and this kind of relates to Alderman Wood's question, was in this area, along Edgebrook right now, when we get a larger flood event, a larger, like, where it rains all day, you won't see a noticeable difference, because that's when Salt Creek comes up, and that's when it floods out Edgebrook. Where you're gonna see the biggest difference is along Oakwood, at these locations here where you have roadway overtopping for these short events. A 25-year event, obviously is supposed to happen once every 25 years. They've kind of gone to a different nomenclature where it's the 4% chance event. So basically, 1 out of every 20, or 4% of the time, you're gonna see overtopping. What we found was the frequency of storm events in here was very small. It's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a 5 to 10.
In a 5-year, yeah.
So you're seeing overtopping somewhere between 10 and 20% of the year. Once this design is done, you'll see it 4% of the time. Getting back to the 25-year event, when you do the design of an IDOT storm sewer, that's for an IDOT rural cross-section, that's for a 25-year event. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Regarding the 25-year, I mean, if we get 2 inches of rain in an hour, I know that's not gonna overflow the creek unless the creek's already elevated. I'll be honest with you, I've seen the end of my block, 2 inches in less than an hour, the east end of the street's closed. But once it stops raining, within less than an hour, the street's open again. Is that the type of effect we're looking at here?
Yes, there's the 25-year event for the storm sewer nomenclature, or the storm design, stormwater events, the nomenclature gets a little tricky. You can have a 25-year, 1-hour event, which is 2.6 inches of rain. You can also have a 25-year event, 2-hour event, which is 3.2. So basically, so we're going to get 2.6 inches of rain in an hour. The storm sewer system will be able to handle that, or stormwater system will be able to handle that. So it's more designed for the short duration, high impact events, to stop water from going over Oakwood, to stop water from going adjacent to people's houses, and to get it down to Salt Creek before Salt Creek has a chance to rise up.
And look, and basically, you guys want to disconnect the Irving Park, is that what you said? You said, and shift it,
There's a large amount of flow that goes towards here.
right, that
Yeah.
goes to Irving Park, and that's where you said all that water from Wooddale Road then flows right back into this street. So if you disconnect that and block, we won't get as much backflow from Irving Park, is that what you're telling me, or?
Well, basically, we're not sending him anything. Right. It's this condition right here. So in the existing case, we're taking this area right here, and we're going to direct it this way. So we have all the rest of this, the church, all still drains through a reconstructed drainage system, storm sewer, along Oakwood to the north here. But because we're not trying to put all of this additional water here, We don't have overtopping along the roadway here, and we only have a minor amount of surcharging where the water's coming up out of this one inlet. So I still wanted to show that so that you see that, you know, in reality, it's really driven by this connection here at Irving Park. We can't really take all of this and bring it back this way. I mean, well, we certainly can, but then the pipes get very large and much more costly, whereas this is really more of a manageable, you know, these are 15 and 18-inch diameter storm sewers, because again, remember, we still can only connect here with a series of small storm sewers because we just don't have enough cover because we got this fiber optic issue. Does that answer that? So we're still maintaining this storm sewer or reconstructing a storm sewer. We're just not trying to put as much water through there. We're basically providing some relief by directing this way. There's an existing storm sewer here right now. I think it's like a 6-inch pipe, and so now we're...
So it's still connected to Irving Park. You're saying you're just diverting some of it to the south.
Correct. Instead of all of this draining through roadside swales and getting over here and then over in here somewhere, it picks up into a storm sewer, and then it runs this way. Instead of doing that, we're taking all of this and we're bringing it here, and we've got a storm sewer system, a small storm sewer system right in this area here with a sewer that's going to go run between the houses here down the lot line and discharge to the back end into the public property, draining a swale.
So what's the red arrows up on the top shooting across?
This is saying that there's an inlet right here at the end of the alleyway there. You'll see in the existing case, there's an inlet there, and there'll still be an inlet there in the proposed case, and what we're saying though is that will still surcharge under a 25-year storm. Basically because of all of the water that's coming down Irving Park. So we're kind of limited there. The only way to avoid that would be is if we were to, say, disconnect this here and then actually bring this, you know, again, you could either bring it back this way, which is kind of bringing it uphill, so it gets very expensive, or to go, again, across private property and then onto, I think this is the lot that you now own, and bring us across this way. So, and again, there's, you know, additional cost there. So the question is can you live with the impacts here? And I think, you know, your analogy earlier actually was spot on. As a layman, I couldn't have said it better as a technical person, in that if you can picture this, what we're saying is that for a small, you know, 25-year, 1-hour storm, so we get 2 inches of rain in an hour, whereas Salt Creek isn't going to flood out over that 2-inch rainfall, that summer thunderstorm that comes. What's going to happen in that 2-inch storm is everything here is going to drain just fine. There'll be no water over the roads. It'll run through the swales and into the storm sewer system. But right here, we will have water that's going to surcharge out of this structure. And here, there's enough drainage that comes from this side of Edgebrook and plus this surcharging here that right there in front of where the lift station is, the water's going to perk over the top of the road for half an hour or an hour or something like that. And again, not feet deep, but like, you know, just burping over the top.
Quick question, just a follow-up, as it goes through the, if I remember right, I had a couple residents telling me it's like a river coming through their backyard and through the side of their homes. Right there at that spot. I mean, are we gonna alleviate some of that?
Right, we bring that down, and I know I don't have the numbers here, but we cut it down drastically, and I want to say it's at least 50%. So like if it's 20 cubic feet per second flowing across there now for a 25-year storm, when we do this and we add a third 10-inch pipe here, we bring it from 20 cubic feet per second down to 10 cubic feet per second. But the bottom line is we couldn't keep it from going over the road there unless we did some additional improvements along here. And again, just becomes a question of, do you want to make those improvements for this kind of short duration event, recognizing that, you know, frequently you're going to have a flood event where Salt Creek's going to back up and it's going to cover the road anyway. And so that was kind of the judgment call that we made at this point to say, look, we're not going to spend, you know, an extra $50,000 or $100,000 putting in sewer along here when we know this is going to back up anyway. So that kind of thing. So, but again, we can certainly look at that and tell you what that would be.
Alderman Wenger?
I heard you mention that you weren't aware that the city bought that, or that a home is going to be removed. And does that mean that you might have done things differently if you knew that? Do you want time to look at that? And maybe there's an easier fix now that that's going to look different?
Well, right, and again, that was my earlier comment, that it may be as simple as the driveway that serves that, that residence or that building now, that could either be taken out and just left as an open swale, or if that were going to be used as part of some improvements to the lift station, we would just put in a larger culvert there, and that may alleviate it. That's what I'm saying, so that, just knowing that, that's a fairly easy check to run in the analysis and say, okay, that's an issue. But again, I'd have to go back and look and see if it really makes a difference or not. If it's simply just putting in a larger pipe right there, we certainly would. My gut feeling is it may be something more extensive that would be needed to bring this down here, so.
So do you see next steps on that our department will get you that information, and then you will go back and see what we can do there?
Yeah, and I think that's pretty straightforward.
That's definitely something we can take up as engineering progresses. Kind of the two major questions that we had were, in order to get the Army Corps permit in an easy fashion, is the council okay with installing an open swale and a vegetated swale adjacent to the creek? We can proceed with not going and doing a vegetated swale and just doing a pipe out, but then we run into Army Corps is not going to be real friendly in issuing that permit. So that's
The concern is it could take a long time, 6 months or longer to kind of do that back and forth with them, whereas if we can say, look, this is what you want, we're going to daylight this storm sewer away from Salt Creek like you've asked, that's kind of what we were thinking.
Is either option about the same cost, whether we run the pipes or the vegetated swale?
roughly it's maintenance. It's maintenance of the vegetated swale.
Yeah. Currently, right now, I assume is it the city that has, some, or is the park districts out there mowing?
Yeah,
Bill?
we take care of that area.
Okay.
The city does.
So that's the easy question, that makes the permitting a lot easier, makes the project run a lot smoother doing a vegetated swale. Kind of the more difficult question, which it sounds like we need to consult police and fire with, is are they okay with the roadway widths, or do we need to widen those?
Alderman Wesley.
I will tell you, in the past, being a fireman in this town, the fire district's going to say you're going to want wider roads, because the simple reason is, we had fires there before, and we couldn't get the downriggers out for the ladder trucks, and we had parking on a lady's lawn when we had a house fire there. So I'll guarantee you the question, you could ask the fire department, and I guarantee you they're going to say they want bigger roads.
Alderman Woods.
On the swales, are the swales, besides conveyance, are they built for storage? Are they going to have any storage capability and slower to reduce, create a slower release as it's traversing across these? Because you were talking about a 2-inch rainfall and getting water running across the street. It doesn't take, I drive there all the time. I get all the phone calls. Half-inch of rain, it's going across the street.
Right.
And a 2-inch event, you can get a kayak out. I can go between probably a dozen different houses there. I'll drive you there.
Right, and again, based on the analysis that we've done and the design that we've come up with the sizing of the swales and the storm sewers that are going to receive the runoff from those swales, our analysis is saying that we shouldn't expect to see that, or the residents shouldn't expect to see that anymore when we have a 1-inch event, we have a 1.5-inch event, even up to this 2-inch event. We get 2 inches in an hour. This is saying, look, this water is going to get picked up and routed along the street system and then through the storm sewers that connect Oakwood down to Edgebrook. So
I'm looking at it sounds like the swales are a very integral part. I know you could add pipes, but that's mechanical and gravity and all those other things. But I think I'm trying to take all things into consideration, so we got the fire department, we got the police department, we got our future intention of developing along the creek, whether we're putting some kind of walks or doing any kind of little thing that we put there. So if we chew up real estate with more pavement today, we're going to squelch completely anything that we might possibly be able to do. I wouldn't want to pretend to speak for everybody that lives on that street, but most of the people that I know there that have talked there would prefer the rural swale cross-section, the smaller road. I personally don't see any, except for what Alderman Wesley brought up with police trucks. I mean, I don't want to make it so we can't get down there and save a house or save a life, but we have to remember we're reducing the amount of houses on those roads also at the same time. So I personally would be in favor for the smaller rural cross-section. Just
Alderman
throw that out.
Catalano.
Have we ever considered looking into doing a deep tunnel underneath Soul Creek?
Basically, as Rob explained, the amount of stormwater that's tributary to Salt Creek, it would have to be a regional-wide effort in order to lower the floodplain elevation. What we were trying to do was focus on the smaller events that normally in a residential section don't cause issues, are causing issues within this subdivision. What we're trying to do is to get rid of those.
Go ahead, Alderman Woods.
Yeah, I was going to say, in an effort to move forward, I was going to make a motion to recommend going with the narrower cross-section, the size that we have existing. Are we calling that 8-foot or 18-foot?
It would be the major point would be maintaining the existing impervious area, basically maintaining the same average roadway width through
Right.
there.
Could we, within that, could we do, what's the end road where that road's, what, 13?
That's what I was just going to say, was, just to be clear, then I
Maybe
think
just
what
that
we're
one
suggesting is right, is, for example, at Carter Avenue, where it's only 13 to 15 feet wide in some areas, that area there, if it's just limited to some of those bottleneck areas where we widen that out, back to, say, 16 or 18 feet.
Right, so maybe if we could make everything that 18, because I think you're saying that existing pavement is
13.
plus or minus 18 foot.
The existing on Carter is 13.
Well, on Oakwood, what's on
Right,
Oakwood, right, those are 18. So what I'm saying, let's call that the standard. So if the Carter and the other streets are 16 or 15, can we bump them, Potter, up to the 18 and go with the rural culvert cross-section?
We would, if we widened any pavement at all and increased the impervious area, we would have to do some section of permeable paver or some other kind of BMP to offset that.
So we could, just simply, we could do some crossings or areas, intersection areas, right, to minimize
Yeah.
and almost.
It becomes
add some
much more manageable if we're talking
decorative
about a
effect.
couple of thousand square feet, 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, versus 18,000. That's where we get thrown way over the threshold.
Right,
and
I would
so
like the
retention
state to
thing.
minimize it, but
Right.
I don't want to minimize it, at a cost on some other area. So that would be my motion, to go to the 18-foot culvert rural cross-section. as
Do I have a
opposed to the-
second on that?
Second.
Some more questions? Go ahead, Alderman, please. Mayor, please.
As far as the 18-foot, everywhere it's already 18 to 19 feet on Edgebrook and Oakwood, except for Carter and Potter, correct?
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, it might, we might hit some
So- so
17-foot
if we're-
sections, but.
So if we're leaving Carter alone, you said leave Carter as is, right, correct? In the motion?
No, I believe it
Or
was
did
to-
you
You
say
said
to
widen
raise it
Carter,
18?
right?
To
18.
I mean, if, I'm saying it, if that's an issue, I'm going on Alderman Eugene Wesley, who was in the fire service before, and the chief, to know better than me, if the north-south streets, I would leave the way they are, but if some of these intermediate east-west streets need to be widened a little bit, and that makes sense for, fire department and the police department, then I would minimize what we have to do, but, widen it a little bit.
I'd like to hear from the chief. Do you think widening everything to 18 feet would be,
Well, certainly down here, I believe so. That's a tight fit down there. I can attest to a couple close calls down there with that. As far as The other roads, probably as a police department, we can get by with the 16 to 18 feet on the north-south streets. But like I said, with the fire department, I mean, the clearance on their rigs is, it's very tight, and you put one of them down the road and try and put another car around it, it's very tough. And I think the outriggers you were talking about is if they have a fire and they have to do those extendable arms that hold down the ladder truck, I mean, that's really where they have nothing to put it down on, so.
So you don't think 18 feet is enough?
I don't know how wide their rigs are. I really would have to defer to them on that. As far as the police department, if, Carter was expanded a little bit, that would help. We could probably live with the current existing north and south streets, but I think you probably would have the fire department saying that in an ideal world, it'd be a little bit wider.
Okay, thanks. Alderman Wesley.
So, let me make sure, you said if we do the Carter Street, and we widen the Carter Street, we would have to go to the paver bricks?
A smaller amount.
All right, I'm still not sold on the paver bricks, because I still don't know what the maintenance is going to be with those things. I mean, we approved a house in town here, and according to the way I understand, and I'm not the expert either, that they have to clean those paver bricks every so often because all the tree stuff gets in those cracks, and I just think it's going to be a maintenance problem for us to maintain that. Because once those holes are plugged up, that water ain't going anywhere. That water is going to sit in those because it won't drain. So until I see some more information on that, and Matt maybe could get some more information on that.
Go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
not sold on that.
The maintenance of it is going to be high. We're going to have to make sure that those holes are cleaned out in between the pavers. Also, I believe what they said in Warrenville, that they have to be re-chipped, or aggregate needs to be put back in between those holes because it will settle and those kind of things. So it will be high maintenance, but anything that we do on this project is probably going to ultimately result in some sort of section that we're going to need to put impermeable paver or permeable pavers on. I guess I'm not going to say more is better on that, but I don't want to have to worry about, a 20-foot section of pavers either. That doesn't seem like the right thing to do either. So if we're going to do something like this, a sizable piece of pavers would probably be better than just a little tiny bit, which will be high maintenance anyway, or higher maintenance.
Mayor, please.
Going back, okay, we're talking about Carter going to about 16 feet. Potter is already at 16 feet and possibly going to 18 feet. Looking at these two streets, I mean, you can see there's not much of a drainage ditch or anything. Could it be solved instead of these pavers, a storm sewer in these two east-west streets instead of the permeable?
There's a storm sewer that'll run right down. Right now, there's one that runs actually here behind this tree. And so that in order to protect that tree, we're basically bringing the storm sewer down here along this side. So, but that's kind of, remember, storm sewers are a conveyance to carry the water, whereas the permeable paver section is really essentially acting as a stone reservoir. We're trying to store the water to offset the additional runoff that would be created by having more impervious surface.
The pavers are required because we can't increase the net impervious area. So for every square foot of asphalt that we add, we have to we have to replace an existing section, or existing square foot with permeable pavers. So that's the main reason for using those. Kind of a bonus is that it reduces stormwater runoff.
What do we have on Carter? Do we have a storm sewer on Carter?
Yes, there is a storm sewer that runs down the north side.
You can see it right
Okay. And are we saying an 8-inch pipe?
No, actually, that's a 24-inch pipe
It's
existing.
already a 24
And in
inch.
order to handle all of the drainage that's up here on the back side of the photo here, this actually becomes a 30-inch pipe. And instead of this jog, it's a straight line all the way down. So that's one of the main conveyance features for the south half of the.
That's part of the
section.
improvements already.
Yes.
Alderman Jacobs?
I don't like to delay a project or anything, but couple concerns, I mean, I'd like to know before I make a decision here is, number one, what does the fire department have to say about this? Number two, I mean, could we even get a rough idea of the cost difference between 18-foot and then to widening them to 22-foot? Not an exact number, but just, you know, is it gonna be 200,000, is it gonna be millions? You know, again, I have no idea.
We can definitely provide what the price difference is for the construction of the asphalt. The issue is the ditch grading. What we're doing is we're taking a 18-foot wide roadway where we have somewhat of pronounced ditches, and we're taking it basically widening out the road, so then we have more earth excavation on the outside. So we can give you an estimate, a pretty good estimate on how much the pavement will cost. The wild card is the ditch grading, and unfortunately you can't estimate that accurately until you get towards final engineering, until you know the exact earthwork. So.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think Alderman Wesley's correct. I mean, we already know what the fire district's gonna say. They're gonna say it's too narrow as is, but it's just a balancing act. I think that area of town is a different area of town with the Charmin Ward 2. Correct me if I'm mistaken here, we're not getting any beneficial extra storm storage with widening the streets. Widening the streets was strictly for better logistical flow for safety vehicles. The area's been working without incident for ever, essentially. I mean, it's logistically harder to get in there, but I mean, you still can get in there. So it's really just, we know what they're gonna say.
Alderman Woods?
I was going to say, given this, as City Manager Murma said, given this area, it's got its own challenges. I mean, we're in a floodplain, a floodway. You know, we're looking at doing some development there as far as stuff with the property that we own, Parkway, just to put in a walk. I mean, the thought of even widening the road, I know would in part incense most of the people that live there. Actually, they'd be up in arms. But, you know, how long has that road been there? And we've found a way to service everybody for, well, the 28 years that I've lived here. We've gotten through it. So if we can marginally improve those small, intermediate, whatever those are, east-west streets, the Potter and Carter, you know, to minimize what we have to do to add cost and throw permeable pavers in there or permeable concrete, which then becomes a whole nother issue. So we're asking ourselves to make the road wider to make more people happy, to increase the amount of pavers we got to put in to make Matt take care of that. Nobody really knows how those last long term. I mean, we're setting ourselves up to fail. So I would go back to, you know, saying I think all things considered, my original motion would keep in the 18, doing what we can do on those side roads to improve movement for the emergency vehicles and move forward. I mean, we've waited many, many, many years to improve this area and the roads.
Now, do we have a second on that?
Yep, we do.
Call the question.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Is part of the motion also to maintain the natural outfall to the creek then as well?
Correct.
Okay, let's call for a vote, please.
Alderman Lazara.
Excuse me, one more time. Can we read that motion, please?
It was just to go with an 18-foot culvert rural cross-section and maintain the natural outfall to the creek.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 18 feet on Potter and Carter, if we can get it, if it makes sense. Obviously, we got to make probably the EPA, IEPA, Army Corps of Engineers, anybody and their brother's got an acronym after his name's got to be
All
involved.
right, so should we make that part of the motion then, on approval?
Right, I mean, I'm leaving some of this up to the engineers. I mean, if they can't make it work, we want the point of least resistance. We want to turn this into a marathon permitting
You want it as
session.
close to existing, as
Correct.
as close to the existing pavement section that we can get, essentially, and still be permitted and be in compliance with the stormwater ordinance. That's what you're asking for, right?
Right.
And to me, the
exactly.
less trees we knock down,
Right, because that
Correct.
gives us the flexibility then
right.
to preserve, those trees. And if we have to widen out Carter and Potter, and we can do that creatively, get a little more room, but yet not, necessarily have to go to full 18 feet on Carter, for example. I think that's, so I don't know how that affects your motion, but.
How does that affect our motion?
I don't think that it affects it. I mean, I think we all understand.
So we
the-
still have
the-
on the approval of the engineers? Pretty much?
Pretty much.
Okay,
yeah.
all right, let's take a vote then.
Alderman Lazara.
Yes?
Alderman Jacob.
Yes.
Alderman Winger.
Yes.
Alderman Catalano.
Yes.
Alderman Sizmarsky.
Yes.
Alderman Woods.
Yes.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
Yes.
Okay, that passes. Now, Rob, was there anything else that you're looking for us to approve tonight?
No, those were
that was
the
it.
two key points to allow us to move forward.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much,
Before-
ladies and gentlemen.
Before they leave, can I have a,
Go ahead, Art.
so what's the next step and the timing of the next step, just so we can
Basically,
relay the hopes and dreams to the residents?
Right now, we're in kind of the preliminary, moving towards final engineering, so this allows us to finalize the storm sewer, the roadways, and the ditches. And then after we do that, then we design the water main. So we always design our gravity improvements, and then our pressure improvements go after that,
Well, how
because you're
long
able
is
to move those up and down. So then we'd be looking in the short term, basically contacting, getting our stormwater plan together, contacting the Army Corps, getting it permitted, and then working with the IEPA for the water main improvements, so.
So does that put us in middle of 2014, end of 2014?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I believe Trotter was mandated to have this design done by May 1.
That's our goal.
By, what, could you
May
repeat?
1.
May 1?
May 1 of
2014.
2014?
Yeah, 2014.
And to you, Mr. Murmas, then, is this in the pipeline for construction in 2014, or is it going to 2015?
Gotcha.
I would have bet my life that somebody would ask that question tonight. We're actually working on the CIP right now internally, staff-wise. I don't have an answer for you on that right now. All we do know is the design will be ready, but as far as picking and choosing projects, or even if we're able to fiscally afford it next year, we don't really have an answer for you right now, but the design should be ready.
Right. And then just
Go
one
ahead.
quick one. We kind of looked at this to break this up, to, correct me if I'm wrong, to do Oakwood and Edgewood separated as, in an effort to move it.
Gotcha.
As Trotter's currently designing it, this design would take 2 construction seasons.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And Mayor?
As far as the construction, I also spoke to Mr. Bushnell about, could this be done in 1 year? And he pretty much said, not a chance.
There's two concerns. One is, basically, the two sections look like two horseshoes stacked on top of each other. And the idea is to do the bottom one first, basically to do that roadway construction, get that done, and then do the other horseshoe on top of that. Kind of the same as when you paint a room. You're painting yourself out of the room, not kind of into a corner, and you're not going to be driving construction traffic over roads that were just reconstructed the previous year. The other concern is this project, the best time to do it would be June, July, August, the times that we're getting the least amount of flooding of Salt Creek, with the majority of the project being adjacent to Salt Creek. If we get a good flood, the contractor is pretty much stalled. The contractor can't work under those conditions. Or we might be getting the roadway ready, testing it, and then a big flood comes and we'd have to retest it again. So with the short duration, with a short construction window, it'd be best to phase it over 2 years.
Go ahead, Alderman Jacob.
When you say May 1st, is that to have everything designed, or is that just, will we have numbers before that, final numbers, or no, or that's all going to be May 1st?
Gotcha.
What do you mean final numbers?
The cost, what it's going to cost.
You wouldn't get that until after, because, I mean, well, you'd have an engineer's estimate, I would assume. which-
Well, that's what I'm referring to.
Once we're able to finalize the stormwater design and get the water main laid out, we'll have a preliminary estimate. That estimate will then move as final engineering goes along. But you'll have numbers before May.
Okay,
May
thank you.
1st.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you very much, Mark,
Thank
for
you.
the presentation. Report and recommendation for surplus property. I'm going to turn that over to Matt.
Yes, we have 4 pieces of products that we need to declare surplus. One of them is a Ford Expedition that used to be used by the police department. And then we have a small R12 generator for the air conditioners that is not utilized anymore. There's a computer and one other piece of equipment. I apologize, I don't have my, here we go. And then there's an old compressor that isn't utilized anymore, that is broken and in need of removal from our equipment fleet. So what I'd like to see is all 4 of those declared surplus at this time, so we can sell the Expedition via auction and probably just scrap and/or recycle the other 3 pieces of equipment.
Motion to approve.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Go ahead, Alderman
I have
Weisman,
one
sorry.
question.
Yes, sir.
Have we resolved, when we send stuff out for surplus, like vehicles, are we putting that back in the department? Vehicle replacement that we have talked about several times, if the police department gets rid of the car, that money should be earmarked for his new squad cars. Public Works get rid of their vehicle, that should be a separate account that they could buy their trucks out of. Have we done that instead of going into one big pot like we talked about? I thought we talked about that before.
Brad, do you have the answer on that?
And you are correct. The GASB standard provides that all vehicles, the GASB standard provides that all vehicles bought out of the general fund, and special revenue funds are all accounted for under the same umbrella. And since they're accounted for out of the same umbrella, those costs have to be allocated out of the same umbrella. But the water equipment does go back to the water funds. There's a segregation between water and sewer equipment, and then, so basically this building is one pot of money and the other 2 locations are their own pot of money. Correct, yeah. This building and the police department, oh yeah, and 720 is one pot of money, and then the treatment plant's its own pot of money.
I'd like to know how much we get for these vehicles after we have them up for auction, talk about that too.
Yeah, we've sent that report out twice in the past year and a half or so. We can certainly, we haven't sold anything in probably 6 months, so when these get sold, we can send that out for you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Items to be considered at future meetings, stream bank stabilizing, that will be in February. Cleanup day with Elk Grove, and that's also going to be in February. Is there anything anyone else would like to add? Alderman Leslie?
I really would like Matt to come back with that paver brick deal that we're talking about, what extra stuff we would have to do on that, because according to what I understand. on
As far as
paver-
maintenance, is that what you
For maintenance, because according to the way I understand paver bricks, you can't even plow it with a metal plow. You have to plow it with a rubber plow. And I don't even think we have a rubber plow in town. So, I mean, you look at, we're going to have to buy another vehicle. So I would like that revisit before we jump in.
So Matt, we would need that because we are going to, regardless of the fact that we are widening it only to 18, you're still going to have that kind of payment, is that correct?
That's what it sounds like.
Right,
That's gonna
so
happen.
either way, we're going to need that. Alderman Woods?
I was going to say maybe Mr. Forrest, if I can pull him out of retirement back there. Didn't we do a parking lot in town, a fairly sizable parking lot, and they used permeable concrete? Was it concrete or pavers? It's probably the same.
That's correct, and this will be the third winter that's gone through, so we can go up and inspect that.
Well, that's, I was
and,
going to offer that information to Matt, and maybe he can talk to them and see how that's held and visually inspect it, and then obviously whatever other sources.
Correct.
but-
Yeah, the permeable concrete, again, as we've had this discussion before, they're using it, ribbons of it in the alleys in the city of Chicago. So if we were to pave maybe just the edges of the roadways with the permeable concrete where they're not getting all that wear and tear all the time, you know, it may work for us.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Winger?
Since we do have our engineers here, my question to them would be with the permeable pavers, that if we're looking at widening to a much smaller extent, as the motion was stated, that could we put the permeable pavers maybe as a ribbon on the sides where we need to, and then maybe it wouldn't impact our maintenance plan because it really wouldn't affect roadway traffic as much? Or do you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't reduce the amount of maintenance. I mean, pavers are pavers, whether they're on the side of the road or in the middle. And if we're going to not be able to salt that area, having it in one general vicinity where I could salt down the middle, but I couldn't salt the edges, then I'd have to have either a different piece of equipment or be able to reutilize a piece of equipment to have multiple uses. So, it's all things we can look into, and we'll work up a report on pavement bricks and those for future agendas.
Alderman Winger, go ahead.
As a follow-on, I believe the presentation referenced BMPs, and this permeable paver was one option as a BMP. So it sounds like there's other options out there. Is that possible, that we wouldn't have to take on the permeable paver, but there might be other options?
I think I have to work with Trotter and Associates, and we'll look into this as an option, and then if there's any other options, we'll bring those forward at the same time.
Okay, because I believe that stands for best management
Best management
practices,
practices.
and then there's different trade-outs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we'll bring all the options together at once.
Okay, great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, anything else? I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
It shouldn't take long. That shouldn't take long.
Yeah, if this takes more than 5 minutes, we got problems. We called to order the Finance and Administration Committee. I'd like the minute taker to take the, or for the roll call, just who's here. I need approval of minutes for a meeting of November 14th.
Second.
2013. You got a report and recommendation for fiscal, I'm sorry, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Report and recommendation for fiscal year change. Brad?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This came up a few months ago. Staff was asked to investigate the possibility of changing the fiscal year from our fiscal year to a calendar year budget cycle. So when I say fiscal year, I mean what we're on now, and calendar years, obviously calendar, so it's all relative to the budget cycle. Just a real quick brief history, and then we'll open it up. The reason that a lot of the communities, especially in DuPage County, non-home rule communities, have the May 1 to April 30th was due to the property tax levy. Saying that it gets, after the PTEL came in the early 90s, getting either 5% or the lesser of CPI, a lot of times they didn't know what that number was going to be. So they would develop these budgets in October, November, and then in March they would get their final property tax levy and go, oh my, we're $200,000 less than we thought, or $100,000 less. So there was an immediate hole punched in their budget 2 months after they passed it. So they went to the May 1 fiscal year to time that up with when they got the final property tax levy to be able to build their budgets more appropriately going forward. Since then, the county's gotten better at telling us what they anticipate the CPI to be, which makes that forecasting easier and a little more accurate. By no way is 100% accurate, because it's always a little bit different, but it's a lot more accurate than it was in the past, which was just a complete shot in the dark. That being said, there's not really a whole lot of pros or cons to the fiscal year or the calendar year. outside of the property tax levy, and just conceptually knowing that, period one's January instead of period one's May. So just conceptually, it's a little bit easier. It's a calendar, you know what a calendar is. So at this point, you'll notice the recommendation from staff is neutral. So it really, at this point, is a policy decision amongst the 7 of you here tonight.
Alderman Wesley?
First of all, I never seen staff come back with a comment that says they mutual on this thing. It's always yes or no. My concern about this is we ran into a situation of bidding a project so late in the year. And now I think it's coming to bite us in the butt. So my question is, the reason why I brought this up is you go January 1 and you go January 1. Therefore, you could bid your process out earlier. I have talked to several mayors that have already done this. This has benefited them tremendously by going January 1 and January 2. You can contact Hanover Park, you can contact the mayor of Roselle. More and more towns are doing this. And their selection is you got that better opportunity to budget out your projects a lot better. Okay, so that's the reason why I'm looking at this. I don't want to be sitting up here again and in October, I'm awarding a contract out again because all of a sudden, oh, now we got this money in May 1st, we didn't spend it. So that's why I said January, you bid it out earlier, and that's what all the towns are going for now. So that's why I still want to see January. I know you can't do it this year, but next year.
Yeah, I'm in favor of keeping it the way it is. I understand what Alderman Wesley's saying, but that's really not relevant to when you let the job or don't let the job. I mean, our strategic planning is what's doing it. The other thing we have to look at is we're doing more and more projects. So at some point, at some level, not all of them could be let January 31st of the year. Otherwise, the city would just explode. We'd never be able to handle it. Do we need to look at how we let the jobs and not let them so late? I would agree, but I'm pretty set with the way we have it, and I think tied in with the tax levies is, pretty smart. So I would be in favor of just leaving it the way it is and just looking at our infrastructure projects and when we let them out a little closer. That's all.
Mr. Murmas?
Yeah, I'd say the main reason for, project delays specifically in the last year and a half, really came down to departmental stability or lack thereof. So it really falls upon staff to kind of stabilize the situation, like Alderman Woods said, and get everything, more organized, more stable. I do think we're moving in the right direction, but that being said, as Brad said, there's not necessarily, cons to changing the fiscal year, so it's not like we're opposed. But if we're strictly changing just for project allocation, it's probably not necessarily that big of an impact.
Mr. Jacobs?
A couple questions, Brad. I'm actually kind of in favor of this just because the courses that we went to in downtown, several people, including auditors, finance directors, mayors, and several people I talked to highly recommended this. And my only concern would be, would there be an additional cost if we did this? Would we have to have our auditors here twice? Because I know there's going to be...
Mr. Brad?
Yeah, thank you. Not twice, but what we'd have to do is have a stub budget, which would run from May 1 to December 31st. So we'd have to have that stub, that 8-month audited. And in talking to some auditors, it's pretty much the same cost as auditing the full year. So either way, you're having to do an audit. So, you do the audit for your fiscal year that would end April 30th, and then you do one for December 30th, and then the next December 30th. So it's not really specifically an increased cost. I mean, yeah, they're out here 4 months sooner, but you're going to have to do an audit regardless on the fiscal year.
Go ahead, Mr. Lazaro.
On what Alderman Jacobs said, why would the other towns and mayors be in favor of this? Does anyone, would you have that answer, or why do they seem like they want to do this.
Did you call?
There's a couple reasons. I mean, from a budgeting standpoint, Alderman Wesley's correct. It's easier to say, okay, we're going to start the project in April, and so we can budget for that in October. But there's nothing anywhere in any statute or code or guidance that says that we can't, in the CIP, budget an eighth of the project in April and then finish the rest of it in the new fiscal year. So, to what the manager said, really, the late bidding has to do with there being 3 public works directors in 15 months. The lack of leadership and coordination in that department really led to a lot of the issues that we had this year. But just, like I said, just intuitively, you know what your fiscal, it's a calendar year, everybody knows what a calendar is, so there's some intuitive nature to it. People like ending the fiscal year at the end of the year in the holiday season. Kind of go into the end of the year easy.
But for you, Brad, it doesn't matter really. Either way, no complications at all then.
No, the first year, you're going to be preparing your budget before you're done with your audit. So there's going to be some overlap and some extra work in there because you're doing 2 or 3 major projects at the same time. So there'll be a little bit of a time drain from a staffing standpoint.
Yeah.
But from a practical, a preparation standpoint, it's the same amount of work either way you go. That's why, there's really a neutral recommendation from staff on this.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jacobs?
Question, Brad, have you talked to any of your peers or any of these people that are so much in favor of this, why they are?
The majority of them actually were council-driven. The council wanted to do it.
Okay.
I've talked to 4 finance directors, and they all said that the council or mayor brought it up and pushed it through. It wasn't staff-driven.
Ms. Winger?
Thank you.
Thank you. On the cons, there's a bullet that says the winter snow fighting operations will be split in half. What does that mean, and can you elaborate?
Sure. Winter typically is from November to February to March. Right now, with our fiscal year ending April 30th, all those months are in one fiscal year. If you go to a calendar year, you have January, February, and March in the beginning. So that's one snow season. And then October, November, December at the end of the year, that's a different season. So the salt contract would spread 2 different fiscal years. And then the overtime allocations would be a little interesting because you got a budget, you have a bubble at the beginning of the year and then a bubble at the end of the year for snow fighting. So it's gonna, the standard, ratios as you go through the year are gonna get thrown off a little bit in a couple of the accounts. It's not unduly burdensome, just something to be cognizant about that. So the salt contract would be over 2 fiscal years and the overtime would be split over 2 fiscal years for snow fighting to plow the streets.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Basically, a lot of the other communities, from what I heard, it's, they feel it's more simplistic.
Yeah.
That's it. As far as, just thought of something when you talked about the snow fighting operations. Would we have to modify our union contracts since they start and stop? Not really. It's not, that wouldn't affect anything, right?
Technically, all the contracts run from May 1st plus 3 years to April 30th. So until the contracts cycle out, we would be doing, steps or COLAs in the middle of the fiscal year instead of the beginning of the fiscal year. But again, it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's not that hard to.
Well, I just kind of,
Yeah, so we would have to change the contracts as they came due.
But as far as, and I think you already mentioned it earlier, I know we spoke about this when I was asking you some questions. Basically, this comes up because of this one project, and let's face it, that, as long as I've been here, I've seen a couple of projects go into November. Maybe this one was a little longer than we would like. I agree. But you made the comment that we do the CIP, we know the projects we're doing, so if we put in that 20%, we can still bid the project in March. By the time the bids come in, they'll start in April. By the time the first payouts, we'll have that 20%. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. As you're going through and doing the CIP.
So, I mean, if we really wanted to bid like Mr. Bushnell was here, if he would have said, hey, I'll have the engineering done, we can go out for bid March 1st, well, if, you know, we know, you know, we know we're gonna push some projects forward, we can budget now for next year, March, right?
Correct, yeah, and we already do the engineering at the fiscal year ahead to get ready to let those bids, so it'd just be a matter of acknowledging that we want to start the project in April instead of May or June, and just figuring out, you know, a rough estimate of how much we anticipate to spend that first month, and then just budgeting that in, just kind of shifting the project back a month from a budget standpoint, cash flow standpoint.
Okay.
Mr. Woods?
Yeah, Brad, I don't know about in the public sector, but in the private sector, a lot of companies will sometimes change your accounting periods and methods in an effort to cleanse or clean up their balance sheets or their assets to look better on paper. I would imagine that some of those, I should have paid more attention in the accounting classes, but that municipalities could look at that too if they're looking to do bond funding or financing or TIF coming out of these bad or you know, economic times that we are. In a lot of villages, it was no secret, or municipalities, cities were hurting. I mean, that could have been one reason that they looked at it. Although I agree it's probably just the mindset of it's just simpler that, you know, I get paid, you know, January through December, I get pay my taxes that way, it's easier to think of the municipality that way. But do you think any of that comes into play?
I mean, I wouldn't want to speculate as to what other municipalities' motivations were. You know, aside from that stub year, because it's a shorter year, I suppose in theory, from a variance standpoint, in an audit process, you could probably represent or otherwise represent some bad numbers in that stub year and just blame it on the fact that it's a shorter year and, oh, I didn't get these 4 months with historically have been good car sales months. And you could kind of massage it through that way. And then, once things picked up, well, now you have a full 12 months to bump that back up. But that would be pure speculation on my part, but I mean, I suppose theoretically, if you're losing a couple of...
I think it would be good speculation.
You know, if you're losing a couple of bad months, yeah, you could make that argument.
Mr. Wilson?
I'm going to make a motion that we, is there a motion on the floor? There ain't a motion. There ain't no motion on the floor. All right, I'll make a motion to go January 1 to January 1 for the next, not this year's budget, next year's budget.
I would second the motion.
Yeah, just to clarify, or be sure we're all on the same page on this one, you know, should this pass, then the budget that we present to you, send out in February, would be an 8-month budget to get us to December 31st of 2014. So it would be coming up here in a couple months.
Mr. Woods?
And the other thing, and you guys, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, this will affect our strategic plan. I don't know how many cities, towns, villages have a strategic plan and plan out as far and are as proactive as we are, but all those things that we have planned out are going to get pushed down 1 year and possibly could be 2 years based on this half-year change.
Mr. Wilson?
First of all, I didn't say do it this year. You're putting the budget together again now for 2014, 2015, right? I ain't saying this year, the following year I'd like to see it done, 15, 16. Because I know we already sent out all the packet stuff for the guys that do the budget. I don't want to do that, jeopardize that.
No, we haven't yet. We're waiting for this.
Well, I'd rather do
to-
that. I mean, because we came ready to do the budget now, so I'd rather go the following year.
Mr. Murmas?
I mean, there will have to be reconfigurations. I mean, not to sugarcoat it, I do think it's going to take us time to sort all this stuff out in excess of what we normally would have had to do. So we'll take time to reconfigure. Something may pop up that we would have to reconfigure.
Yeah, so if you want us to wait, get through this next budget cycle, then do it that that's fine. That was part of my clarification, just
That's
to make
what I
sure we're,
want. That was my intention of that motion.
we're in the same, going the same direction, you know?
Right.
Mr. Jacobs?
In regards to what Mr. Woods said, is that true? Would this affect our strategic plan?
Not next year, following year.
I think the projects would still get done technically at the same time, but it could impact what fiscal year they're budgeted in, so it would be, the representation of when they would get done could change. I mean, I think project getting built in July would still get built in July, it's just how that July is classified.
Thank you. So then that defeats the argument they have it's going to change how we do jobs. Right? That's the whole reason we're changing this, is so we don't sublet a job later in the year. But you just told me if we change it, all the jobs are going to go out the same anyway, so not quite sure why we're going through all the gyrations to not change anything
Good, Mr.
or
Murphy?
improve anything.
Well, like I said about 15 minutes ago, this is not gonna, if we're doing this to change bidding, I just don't see it.
Mayor?
I'm in favor of keeping it the way it is. I don't think it's gonna make that big of a difference. We can plan ahead and just save this time and whatnot with the auditors, and I don't see why we need to do
I
it.
mean, unless there's something I'm missing. I mean, the whole contracting thing, I don't get it.
I'm in favor of whatever way we go here, but I will tell you right up front here, if another bid comes up here that we're going out for bid in October for another project anywhere in the city, I will vote no for it. And the staff bear whole accountability of get these projects to us sooner to go out for bid. Because we in a situation now, we almost barely got a project done. And this ain't the first time this has happened. It happened last year too. We were pouring concrete last year in snow in the alleyways. So if this staff is going to change their attitude and bring the contract sooner to us to approval than pushing it through in October, then I will have no problem with changing my motion, that we do it the right way. But I'm just telling you, this is a problem here. I mean, 2 years in a row, we had laid concrete, laid asphalt in rain and snow. We laid concrete the year before on the alley in the rain. I mean, it's ridiculous. Let's get these contracts to us sooner. I have a street that still ain't done the right way, and these poor people in their driveways won't be using them the right this year.
I'm going to call a question. I have put it to a roll call vote.
Alderman Lazara.
No.
Alderman Jacob.
No.
Alderman Winger.
No.
Alderman Catalano.
No.
Alderman Sizmarsky.
No.
Alderman Woods.
No.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
No, but I will tell you that these contracts better come sooner then.
We got a report and recommendation for TIF direction. We'll give that back over to Brad again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few weeks ago, you may recall, Ms. Berry was in here and gave the TIF primer presentation. And effectively, we didn't ask for any direction that night, so we're coming back after a couple weeks, let it soak in. Real quick analysis, if the council wants to ever consider a TIF in that area, we have to do this analysis. If you never want a TIF there, then we don't do the analysis. So really, that's the decision point. If you ever want one there, we have to do this. If not, then we'll put it to bed and just keep moving on.
Mr. Wesley?
I'll make the motion to approve to move forward with that area for a
Second.
All those in favor?
No,
Aye.
questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Watch out for the bus.
Yeah.
So are we saying that we're approving to go forward to spend the 50 grand on this? That I've lived through one TIF study, we went forward with it, all confident, spent the monies, and it went, no, it was determined that it was not a viable option, and it ended. This was several years ago. So I want to know our ducks are in a row What essentially are you looking for approval on tonight?
Yeah, tonight, we're simply looking for direction if the council wants to consider doing the TIF. We're going to have to go out and get pricing and proposals from firms to do that. So tonight, it's just basically, do you want staff to take that effort to go get pricing?
Well, then if I may-
And what we're going to do is that it's going to be structured such that, you know, that number that Mr. McKenna threw out was kind of cradle to grave
Yeah.
on that. So when we get the price and the proposals, there's going to be certain trigger points. So it's going to be there's, I think, 4 to 5 different steps to it. So we're going to get a cost to each one. So at any point, if you want to pull the ripcord and bail out, we're going to be there's going to be defined markers and points where we can say yes or no along the way. So this, first of all, this isn't a contract. We're not allocating any money. Second of all, there's going to be points where you can just hit the brakes and jump out, and there's going to be set price points for each of those areas along the way.
If I may follow up, Jim. So what I would appreciate before we start looking for different companies to do this and bidding and that sort of thing, it was my understanding that there was an in-house look at the different properties and whether it was viable or not. And if that does exist, can we look at that before we go forward and look at companies to do the analysis?
I can do a TIF eligibility analysis right now. It's going to meet
Okay.
the criteria.
It's
It'll
gonna
meet the
what?
criteria. I'll tell you right now, the area will meet the criteria.
And will you just give me a basic map of exactly the area? And it doesn't have to be right now. I will support it if you're saying it will meet it. I will support moving forward in this next step, but just at some point, get me a map in the next week or so.
Well, all the TIF eligibility study does is confirm that the area would need it, and it's a requirement before we move to the next step. So we have to do this if you ever want to even consider anything over there. We can say that we know it's going to meet it, and typically it always does meet it. It's really not that hard to meet the eligibility for it, but you have to do this as a precursor before you can do anything else.
And what's the cost of doing that?
That's what we need to let,
Oh, rough cost.
yeah. Yeah, you know, I mean, the cost was cradle to grave. There's a number of different steps. I don't want to speculate, and I don't want somebody to watch this and then give me the price that I just said on camera too, so.
Okay.
Mr. Wesley?
Just so you know, I'm going to make the statement again here, like I did. Just for people know, we aren't looking to TIF the whole entire city. We are only looking at a Thorndale corridor area up on Wooddale and Thorndale. Okay? So we aren't looking to TIF a residential area. We are looking at the Altoona O'Hare that's coming in to try to get more businesses into the area. Because if we don't move forward with this TIF, I got a feeling when our people go to these conferences and try to get businesses, they're going to say, well, are you going to TIF us and give us some type of incentive? I'd rather TIF it and do, instead of us sitting up here and giving a development thousands of dollars out of the city's funds to TIF it. So that's the whole business of TIF, and I guarantee you that has met the qualification. And it's a Thorndale corridor and not residential area at all.
Mr. Woods? Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor, you first.
Basically, the TIF is going to be for the infrastructure over at Thorndale. The TIF is, we're going to have a lot of infrastructure over there. As the highway goes in, we've seen some of the numbers, we don't have the final numbers, so I don't want to blurt anything out right now. But we've got other road improvements, sewer improvements, and everything. And then the discussions will also come with the schools and the park districts and the fire districts will all be at the table anyways, like was said at the meeting.
Mr. Woods?
Yeah, I think we've done a lot of work and spent a lot of money to put ourselves in the position that we're in today, you know, with the prior studies and planning and form-based codes and the money we're spending on engineers and proactive with the tollway coming through. We pretty much owe it to ourselves to at least answer the question. And that was one of my first questions when they were here, was how much do I need to expend minimally to get to the answer, yes or no? I didn't want to, you know, as Alderman Winger said, waste 50, 100,000 if it's a waste of time. But if staff is pretty sure, and it sounds they are, I say, again, we owe it to ourselves to move forward and at least explore all the opportunities to maximize our return on the investment we made over the last 10 years in that area.
Is that it? Yeah, I know there's a motion second. Take the roll call, please.
Alderman Lazara?
Yes.
Alderman Jacob?
Yes.
Alderman Winger?
Yes.
Alderman Catalano?
Yes.
Alderman Sizmarsky?
Yes.
Alderman Woods?
Yes.
Alderman Eugene West?
It passes. We have items for consider for future meetings. One is CIP for January.
Yeah.
Mr. Lazar?
I'm not sure if this is the right committee for this, but I would like to see the anti-idling be brought up to the committee, in particular, the area that's been developed for the trucks along Woodell Road.
Is that still a state law? Mr. Murmas?
Staff's currently working on some items. We're going to have it on a committee within the next month or so. Yeah.
Second, you have the water rate discount for veterans coming up January, February. Is that it? Anything else to be added to future meetings? Nope. I'll make a motion for adjournment.
Second?
So be it. Motion
All
carries.
in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.